Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Buddy, just take a bite. Bobby urged, but Buddy's dog turned his face away from the chicken cutlet. He didn't want to eat. Buddy was seriously ill and couldn't get up anymore, and the boy suffered for it with all his soul. After all, he had no one more dear to him than a dog. For 2 years, Bobby met Buddy when he once again ran away from the orphanage.
But he did not sit quietly in a cozy and warm place where Aunt Mary cooked delicious borscht and baked fragrant pies for tea. Craving for adventure greatly upset his favorite teacher, Polly Patricia. Only thanks to her wild and withdrawn 3-year-old kid, who was picked up at the train station, grew up a kind and open guy. "Where have you been?" 2 days, excitedly asked Polly Patricia, and seeing a small dog behind his back, added, "Who's that?"
"That's Buddy," Bobby muttered. "He's a stray, like me. Nobody wants him and me. I'm not kicking him out."
Bobby prepared to defend his friend and even to take any punishment he could, but that didn't happen. Polly Patricia smiled.
"How skinny is he? We should feed him. Take him into the yard. Give him what's left in Aunt Mary's kitchen. I'll have Jerry the janitor build a booth." "I dibs on Uncle Jerry's help in cleaning up after the dog," she said. "Okay, all right. Thank you." "Buddy, you're not getting kicked out," exclaimed a happy Bobby. "Because we need you both," said the teacher, and hugged her naughty pup. So the dog stayed at the orphanage and soon became a favorite of the children. They took turns cleaning his box, washing bowls, and cleaning up piles. The superintendent, who was against the experiment, finally gave in and admitted that Polly Patricia was right. Pets make children more responsible and kinder, better than rules and lessons. And then Buddy got sick. They tried all the inexpensive remedies, but nothing worked. The dog was getting worse and worse. "Maybe he ate something bad," Jerry suggested. "Maybe somebody kicked him." People are all kinds of people. Seeing the tears on the child's face, the janitor added, "You better go to the dog doctor. His veterinary clinic is over there. They can help you with anything." Bobby ran as fast as he could in the direction Jerry had shown him. Indeed, across the street from the drugstore was a small building with a brightly colored Dr. Wolf sign. There were several people inside, with cats, dogs, even a monkey on their arms. "Can I just ask?" The boy addressed the stranger with a sheepdog with a trembling voice, and he nodded his head. In the office sat a young doctor with kind eyes. He was writing something down. "What are you worried about?" he asked. "My name is Bobby. I don't know where to start," said the boy. "My dog is sick. What do I do? He's lying there whimpering and he won't eat or drink." Bobby's lips quivered. He could feel the tears coming, and the boy clenched his fist tightly to keep from crying. The doctor saw that. "My name is Daniel John," he introduced himself. "Then we'll know each other. Who's Buddy?" "He's my dog. Actually, he's an orphanage dog. We've been giving him all sorts of belly powders, but they don't work. I think he might die." "Oh no, really," Daniel John calmed him down. "Why don't you run down to the orphanage and get someone to bring him in? I'll examine the dog for free and do an ultrasound, x-rays, take some tests. I'll give him whatever meds I can afford at first, and then I hope you can handle it."
"Thanks, Buddy," the doctor cheered Bobby and stormed out of the office.
"Daniel John, not my name, not Buddy, not the doctor shouted after him, and he heard the queue erupt in laughter. By evening, the dog was examined. Daniel John found serious damage to his internal organs, giving him shots and prescribing a diet. The vet gave him medication and diet food. "Here, Bobby, look. It's all written here," he said. "Show this to your nurse. She can give Buddy his shots. But the dog needs surgery, and it's not going to be cheap." Daniel John named the amount. "Unfortunately, I can't take on that kind of expense," said Bobby. "My mom is very sick at home. I'm struggling to make ends meet. You know, you're going to have to find the funds yourself. You're a smart kid. I think you can handle it." When the orphanage found out how much money was needed for treatment, the teachers grabbed their heads. Of course, no one had that kind of money. Even with the combined modest salaries, teachers did not collect even half of the necessary amount. Better to put the animal to sleep and not torture it, Jerry said sullenly and looked back at Buddy. No, said little Ollie, followed by the other girls. They could hear, for they were walking nearby. We're not going to put anyone to sleep, but we're going to continue the treatment, said Polly Patricia sullenly. Don't scare the children. I'll find the money, Bobby said loudly. I will. And he ran away from the orphanage again. Give me a dash of gold for Christ's sake. I need it or Buddy will die, Bobby sang in the crosswalk, playing a little harmonica. People threw money, and some stood and listened to the kid's pitiful song. Get out of here, shouted a nimble bum and pushed Bobby's shoulder painfully. Takes his money. I'm not stealing. Bobby was confused and stood there like a stumbling block. Someone helped him collect the coins and bills, putting them in a pile. So he stood there with a small bag of money, just enough for a movie and ice cream.
Boy, come here. A distinguished man in expensive clothes beckoned to Bobby.
He obediently approached, trusting the rich man's solid appearance. Listen, what's your name? I'm Dinas Igor, the stranger introduced himself. I'm Bobby. Listen, Robert, do you want to make easy and just a lot of money? He suddenly offered.
I do, but it doesn't work that way, Bobby replied, remembering his conversation with Polly Patricia, in which she had told the boys that no one would give their money away for nothing, citing terrible examples.
But I won't give you my organs, and I won't steal anything for you, he added. Denise Igor laughed. Do I look like a bandit? I'd like to offer you a deal. Let's go to a cafe, and we'll talk there. This isn't the right place. While Bobby treated everyone to cakes and hot tea, Dennis Igor began his story.
You see, brother, my wife is very ill at home.
Nobody can understand what's wrong with her. Severe weakness, dizziness, and general impotence. As they say, God did not give her children, though she wanted them very much. Your job would be to be around her constantly during the day, looking after her, helping her, reading books, just to talk about this and that. She refuses the help of a professional nurse. Will she accept you? I know she will. You could even sing her your own song. She'd love it. My wife's name is Barbara Valerie. She's kind. So what's it gonna be? What's it gonna be, Bobby? I'll give you the money as soon as you start working. Bobby was flattered that Dennis Igor was calling him by his full name. Besides, he really needed the money right away. When Bobby walked into Dennis and Barbara's house, he was amazed at the spacious room, especially the huge television. The house itself was a 3-story mansion with turrets and many rooms. Bobby wondered to himself why 2 people would live in such a huge house. After all, they had no children, not even a dog. Everywhere perfect interiors like on the pages of expensive glossy magazines, and not a single living soul. Boring. Only now did Bobby realize why Dennis Igor had asked him to be with his wife. They cautiously entered the small, bright bedroom where a young blonde woman lay on the bed, turned to face the curtained window. Barb, I've brought you an interlocutor, Denise said quietly to Igor. Bobby, go meet your hostess and get to your duties. Denise nudged Bobby, slipped an envelope of money into his jacket pocket, and walked out. Bobby sneaked around, afraid to wake his ward. He walked over to the patient's bedside. He wanted to get a good look at the one being paid so well. Barbara was awake. She turned her head and looked at his guest. Her face was pale and sad. Bobby's heart clenched at the sight of such a sight. He felt sorry for Barbara, who had everything but her health. Who are you? Slightly audible, she asked. Why did he bring you here? I'm going to work here, said Bobby. I'm going to help you in everything. And this uncle, your husband, will pay me a lot of money, and then I can cure my buddy. Your what? Barbara smiled faintly. Buddy, my dog. He needs an operation of this cost, and Bobby spread his arms, the way fishermen do when they brag about the size of the fish they've caught. Barbara smiled. She definitely liked this direct and honest kid. You can call me Aunt Barb if you don't want to, or if you don't feel comfortable sitting with me. Then I'll let you go. Don't worry, I'll give you the money for the dog's treatment anyway. At least it'll help someone. Not Aunt Barb, Bobby answered firmly. I'll stay with you. Your husband has already given me some of the money. If you can, help me raise the rest. Also, it's kind of dark and stuffy in here. It's nice weather outside. You have to let some fresh air in. That's what they always told us at the orphanage, so Bobby opened the window and opened the window and opened the thick curtains, and a warm summer breeze blew into the room. Barbara smiled and propped herself up on her elbows. Bobby considered that a good sign. Look, don't waste any time. Take the money to the vet. Have him do the surgery. Tell him Barbara Valerie will pay for everything. Have the bill sent to this address. They know me well in town, Barbara said. Have you memorized what you need to say? Run and say, Buddy, Bobby unbelieving his good fortune. Bobby nodded his head affirmatively and headed for the door. But suddenly he was back. He ran up to Barbara and hugged her tightly. A minute later he was gone. She got up and walked carefully to the window so that no one would see her. Bobby was nimbly flying at full speed. Barbara smiled. Today was an extra day. Thanks to this, the orphanage had brought her the joy of some boy. Uncle Jerry, the panting boy, called out, "Where's your wheelbarrow? I'm taking Buddy to surgery." He'd found the money, earned it himself. Daniel's surgery was a success. You want me to tell you it lasted a few hours? By evening, Buddy was wagging his tail happily, and the next morning, he was begging for food while he stayed in the vet's care. Bobby, on the other hand, went to work at Barbara's house. He clutched the invoice tightly in his hand. "Hello," said the sick woman. Her eyes glistened with curiosity. "Did your friend bring the bill?" "Good morning," Bobby smiled at Aunt Barbara. "Here are the receipts. Thank you so much for me and Buddy and all the boys, and this is for you from them." Barbara picked up a large folder. There were children's drawings and wishes for a speedy recovery. Tears came to her eyes. She hadn't expected such warmth from complete strangers. "Thank you, Bobby," she said quietly. "Don't cry, you'll get well too."
Bobby persuaded the sick man with all his wide, childish soul. "You'll see. Do you want me to sing you a song?"
Barbara wiped her tears with a napkin and nodded her head. "The song is cuckoo, the music is folk. The words are probably folk, too." Bobby Raja Bobby began, "You cuckoo, cuckoo, one cuckoo and two cuckoos." When Barbara heard these simple words, her face changed. "Who sang that song to you?" "I know the person who composed it. It was a friend of mine. I used to live in a village not far from here when we were about 10 years old. We went swimming with her to the river. We were having so much fun that we forgot about safe water behavior. We swam too deep. Suddenly, I was swept up in the current and pulled to the bottom. I remember running out of air. I ran out of energy, and I was so terrified that I was going to die. What if someone's hand pulled me out of the pool by my hair? I took a breath. It was my friend Ellie. She saved me, but she drowned." "Drowned how?" gasped Bobby, who hadn't expected the story to end so horribly. "She was swept away by the current. I had no power to help her. They never found her," Barbara sighed, "so the parents buried an empty coffin."
"It wasn't your fault," Aunt Barbara Bobby comforted her. "It wasn't anyone's fault."
She looked at the boy. She felt ashamed that she had burdened him with her problems. Bobby had grown up without parents, and that was hard enough. Besides, she felt bad that she had to deceive the child by dragging him into this dirty game that Dennis was playing. In fact, Barbara was perfectly healthy, just pretending to be dying, and it wasn't the whim of a bored rich woman. Not at all. Barbara was panic-stricken by her husband, who in public was an exemplary and caring spouse, but in reality a real monster. To this day she recalls as a terrible dream a conversation between Dennis and her close friend, who turned out to be his mistress. Then Barbara's heart sank into her heels. Barbara listened to the whole dialogue, hiding behind the open door and holding a heavy tray. "What are you going to do?" hissed a disgruntled Nastia. When Barbara came out of the living room to fetch dessert, that's when she asked to join them for dinner. "I have a plan," Dina said quietly. "Wait a little while, my dear. You'll have it all. The house, the company and her diamonds. Just be patient. I've got a poison that no forensics can see. But it doesn't work fast, so you'll have to wait. When Vaska's not dead, I'll put it in the coffee. Then there will be no odor, and the poison will work faster." "You're a genius," Nastya smiled and pinched Dennis's cheek. Barbara looked at the tray, a jug of coffee she had made herself. Even knowing I wasn't here, her hands shook. But Barbara pretended she had just walked over and tried to calm down. She was disgusted to see this evil pair of traitors determined to steal her life, and Barbara was firmly determined to get her revenge. "I've got you to help me. Are you afraid, darling? I won't give you up that easily." "I'm going to expose you," Barbara said. "Here, help yourselves. It's the best quality coffee, and it's good for your health." She poured a cup for her husband and her traitorous friend. They looked at each other meaningfully. But Barbara already knew what the murderer was thinking, and that calmed her down a little. All that remained was to eat nothing and drink nothing from her husband's hands. "I've lived," Barbara thought. And now she had to lie to everyone that she was dying. Even her parents felt sorry for her mom. But it couldn't be helped. She couldn't be put in danger. Barbara's thoughts were interrupted by Bobby. Polly Patricia was singing a song. We all know it at the orphanage. We're very fond of Polly, that's what they call her amongst themselves. She's the only reason I'm not running away for good. Because I know she'll worry. And she let me take Buddy. And she helped me with the treatment and the fundraising. You'd have loved her to death. That's the Polly that drowned. Then why didn't she come home? I don't know. That's why I'd like to find out from her. Will you introduce me? Let's go with you to your Polly's, Barbara suggested. What do you mean? Let's go to Polly's. Bobby was surprised. You can barely sit up. I've got to feed you, bring you a drink. Even if I called a cab, you wouldn't be able to get down, unless I asked Dennis Igor. No, Dennis, Barbara exclaimed. I'll tell you everything, but you must keep my secret. I swear, said Bobby, and his eyes sparkled with eagerness to know the secret. I can actually walk. I'm well, but I pretend to be sick. You see, it's to keep me from getting killed for money. And who wants to kill you? The boy was horrified. My husband and his mistress. Bitter, replied Barbara. Now you know everything too, and you must keep your mouth shut.
If they find out, you and I will be in danger, just so you know. If anything happens to me, it's Denis Semenov's fault. Remember that. And then you have to tell my story to someone, but only someone you trust.
I get it, Bobby said quietly. I'll help you. Aunt Barbara, and tomorrow I'll meet my teacher. Bobby felt like a spy caught behind enemy lines. It was more of a game to him than a confusing life situation. So when Denis walked past him, the boy squinted and wagged his finger at him. What's wrong with your assistant? He almost showed me his tongue, Denis said in surprise, looking at his sick wife. That's how we play it, Barbara answered in a weak voice, worried that the boy might talk. If anything, I'll be at the country club. You won't miss me, will you? Denis asked casually. Sure, go, Barbara whispered, pretending to be exhausted, and finished her coffee. I'm exhausted. Let the boy go back to his orphanage. Denise was satisfied with her answer, quickly changed into a tracksuit, took a large bag, waved goodbye, and left for his mistress. Barbara was well aware of this. Waiting until the convertible was around the corner, she gladly got out of bed and went to the kitchen to make herself and Bobby something tasty. Luckily, Denise had absolutely no knowledge of the household and rarely looked in the refrigerator, preferring to dine at expensive restaurants, grabbing a snack on the run and paying attention to his girlfriend with a chocolate dessert. The two conspirators went to the orphanage so as not to take any chances. Barbara hailed a cab. That way she could slip unnoticed from the gaze of the ubiquitous neighbors. To do this, she had to wear wide jeans and a hoodie instead of a sweatshirt. And at the same time, she wore a baseball cap up to her eyebrows. Now skinny Barbara looked a lot like a guy. When they drove up to the Heart shelter, Barbara's heart raced. She couldn't wait to see her favorite friend, the performer, to thank her for everything, to cry on her shoulder, to beg for forgiveness. Polly Patricia was in the auditorium, dusting the piano and the floor. Barbara called her name and ran up, spreading her arms for a hug. Polly turned around and looked surprised at the young woman running toward her. Barbara nodded cheerfully to Bobby, who quickly realized that something had gone wrong. Barbara suddenly stopped abruptly and stared at Polly. She didn't recognize her friend. She didn't look like Polly at all. And her eyes were bright green, not blue. "You're not Polly? I'm sorry," Barbara breathed out and cried, unable to understand. The teacher demanded an explanation from Bobby. Then she understood. "So that's not my Polly. Aunt Mary's neighbor described her to me. Said she wrote it herself and sang it with a friend once. So you're that friend?" "Yes, I want to see her," Barbara said.
So you missed her and suffered without my help. Why is your neighbor's name Mary?
"I don't know, but we can find out. I'll write down the address, and you can go and see her. But you must buy some milk on the way. Mary can't walk." "What's the matter?" Barbara was horrified. "She was hit by a car the other day. She barely survived. The doctors diagnosed a serious hip injury. She needs an operation that costs as much as an airplane wing." "Well, there's no way they can afford that kind of money." "Poor Mary," sighed Polly Patricia. "Every day I go in and help her with her chores. She's got no one." "Well, she'll have me now," said Barbara. "It'll be all right. Let me get the address." Several hours had passed since Barbara and Bobby left the house. Denise was due back. The cab, as luck would have it, was stuck in traffic. Barbara became nervous. She was afraid that the truth about her alleged illness would come out, and then she and Bobby would be in danger. There was no telling what a pinned-down hubby might do. After all, Barbara didn't know him at all. "Who are you really?" "Dennis Semenoff," she thought. In the meantime, he came home. Not finding his wife, he rejoiced, imagining her dead body being carried out of the room. But on entering the kitchen, he was cruelly disappointed. The table was littered with various delicacies, as if the place had been overrun with this diner. 2 cups had long since gone cold, indicating that the hostess and her cunning assistant had left the house quite some time ago. But that wasn't what pissed Dennis off. More than anything else, it turned out Barbara wasn't drinking coffee from the jar he poured the poison from, but from another, identical one that she'd probably stashed somewhere. So that old hag must have gotten wind that we were trying to kill her from somewhere and knew all about it, and she pretended to be half dead. She's a bastard. And the kid seems to know it. Looking at me so slyly and defiantly, the revelation startled Dennis. What if his wife went straight to the police? He began to think frantically about what to do in that case. It was dangerous for him to leave things as they were.
5 minutes later, the front door opened. Barbara and Bobby began to make their way to the 2nd floor, where she was supposed to lie on the bed and make a dying face. But they didn't succeed. When the conspirators turned on the light in the room, they both shrieked. In a rocking chair beside the empty bed sat Dennis and glared angrily at the entrance. "Well, Barbara, this is the end of your game," his husband hissed, narrowing his eyes like a snake. "And what did you mean to prove by that? That your husband is an idiot? Or did you want to show you were smarter than everyone else? Make fun of me?"
"You know what? Don't yell in front of the baby," Barbara said dryly. It suddenly helped her to curb her fear by being angry with her husband, so it didn't matter anymore. "You wanted to kill me so you could steal the firm and marry Nancy. Well, that's a lie and your speculation." Dennis started to deny it. "You can't prove anything." "I will," Barbara said firmly, looking straight into her husband's eyes. "How do you know I don't have proof?" Barbara was bluffing, of course. But Dennis didn't know that, so he lost his temper. "Yeah, I'm sick of you. You care about one job and I don't. You didn't even have children with me. You've never had time for anything. But Nancy promised at least 2, a boy and a girl, and she takes care of me. Your prenup was clever. In case of infidelity, everything goes to the other half, and I don't want to be left with nothing. You left me no choice. Veriara, the only thing left was to get rid of you quietly, poison you, wait for you to die. And I guess you found out all about the poison in the coffee. But so blame yourself." Dennis Eager stood up and stalked toward her with a menacing look. All Barbara Valerie could do was yell, "Bobby, run, get the hell out of here, you puppy. I ain't paying you nothing," Dennis Eager yelled. Bobby turned on the recorder on his cell phone that Barbara Valerie had given him, slipped it into his pocket, and walked quickly to the door as the woman had instructed. Behind him there was swearing and china cups banging against the floor. Bobby stepped away from the house and called the police. When the front desk heard exactly where the unknown kid was calling for an outfit, they not only didn't believe him, but threatened to penalize him for disorderly conduct if it happened again. Dennis Semenoff's reputation as a decent businessman had never once failed him. Bobby was upset that Barbara's deception had been exposed and now she was in danger. But on the other hand, he was glad that she would finally find her missing friend. And he didn't need any more money from Dennis, because Jack the cat was almost healthy thanks to Barbara and Daniel John, and that warmed the soul of a child who was more worried about others than himself. Visits to cats and veterinary clinics. Bobby went to the orphanage where Polly Patricia was waiting for him. "So, did you go to Mary's?" "How did it go?" "No, we didn't make it," Bobby sighed. "Aunt Barbara and her husband had a fight because she didn't die like he wanted, and he chased me away. How is that possible?" "I've heard that Dennis Semenoff is a decent man, so please don't make things up." Polly Patricia was perplexed. "Okay, don't worry about it. You'll go and see her tomorrow and check on her. How are you doing? Go have dinner. Aunt Mary made waffles with condensed milk today." Bobby woke up early the next morning, anxious to see Barbara and make sure she was all right. The dining room was still empty, but the tables were already set. After a quick breakfast, Bobby ran to Barbara's house. It was only a couple of blocks away. When he got to the gate, he was surprised to find it ajar. As he stepped through the massive doors, he found that the patio was open as well. "What kind of open house is this?" Bobby said aloud. "Hey, is anybody home?" Aunt Barbara, Dennis eager, but no one answered. After running through the house from bottom to top, Bobby waddled back inside. Some unexplainable feeling was pressing on his chest, rumbling inside him as if he was short of air. The children from the orphanage were already playing on the playground and having fun, but Bobby didn't care about them. He retired to the break room and turned on the TV machine. And now for the breaking city news announcer tonight. Barbara Semenova, a well-known businesswoman and the main philanthropist of our city, committed suicide. She jumped off a bridge into the river and drowned. The body is still looking for rescuers, but except for her clothes, have not yet found anything. The inconsolable husband reported that Barbara was fighting an incurable disease, but despairing went to extreme measures. The funeral will be held on Friday. Now for some other news. No, that's not true. She didn't jump off the bridge. He killed her. Bobby screamed out of shock. Grief choked his heart. "What's the matter with you, kid?" Polly Patricia came running into the room. "Why did you pass out?" "Did you scare me?" "Did Barbara's husband kill her?" Bobby repeated. "He wanted to poison her, and now he's killed her altogether." "Murder? What on earth are you talking about?" "Calm down," complained the tutor. "You're wrong. It is not easy to kill a man. What kind of animal would you have to be to raise a hand against a woman? And Dennis Semenoff is a decent man. You're just very upset." Bobby realized he was being disbelieved again. That was hard to take. "There's no use calling the police. They might send him to the juvenile hall. Who would listen to him?" And then Daniel came to mind, the animal doctor. What if we told him? Daniel John helped. Bobby came running into the vet's office, out of breath. "Trust me, please." And he told his story straight to the point, without leaving out a single detail. And Daniel seemed to believe him. "So show me where Barbara lives. 'Cause I'm not from around here. I don't know my way around town yet." When they reached the house, the door to the terrace was already closed. Bobby ran around, listening to every rustle behind the wall. Suddenly he heard a low thud. It sounded like someone tap dancing somewhere underground. "Daniel John, look, what's that?" Bobby called out. "It's Morse code. Someone's asking for help. There are people in the house." "All right, Bobby, stand back," Daniel commanded. With a hard kick, he kicked open the door to the terrace. They walked toward the sound, which was getting stronger. The door to the basement was padlocked and propped up with a board for good measure. But Daniel made it through. When he opened the door, dampness and darkness enveloped them. The light bulb was out, so he had to turn on the flashlight on his phone. Someone was mooing in the darkness and kept pounding hard on the pipe with their heels. It was Barbara. Her hands and feet were bound tightly and her mouth was covered with a gag.
Aunt Barbara, Bobby rushed to her and hugged her. "Are you alive? I was so afraid you were really dead. They said you drowned."
Daniel untied the captive and brought her out into the light. "Hello, I'm a friend of Bobby's," he said, and was embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Barbara. I kicked the door in here. I'll make it up to you later."
Hello, Barbara stared into the blue eyes of her savior and couldn't find anything else to say.
"Hey," Bobby reminded himself, hugging them both. "Let's get out of here. What if your crazy husband comes in with a gun?" "He won't. He's probably at the airport by now," Barbara said tiredly. "He left me to starve to death, and he withdrew all our money and is trying to escape abroad. He's not going to make it," Daniel grinned. "I'll call my friend the investigator and tell him everything."
"I remember," Bobby exclaimed, "when Dennis Ego scolded me and Aunt Barbara. I recorded his conversation and he confessed everything."
"Oh, but you're a detective," Daniel laughed. "Good for you. You didn't hesitate. That'll help." While Daniel dealt with the capture of Barbara's devious husband, she decided to thank her saviors with dinner. Besides, she needed to calm down. A whole day without food or water was taking its toll. So when Daniel returned, they were treated to a sumptuous meal. Daniel John and Barbara Valerie hit it off right away. That pleased Bobby, who liked the vet. If a stranger walked into their dining room at that moment, he would have thought they were a friendly family having dinner and discussing how their day was going. Daniel was telling some funny story from his practice. Suddenly, Bobby blurted out, "I wish you two were married." There was an awkward silence, and he realized he'd said too much. But Daniel mentally thanked him. He'd liked the sweet and fragile Barbara at first sight. The silence was interrupted by a phone call. "Daniel, they caught your fugitive," the investigator reported. "You got him right off the plane, the bastard. Denny's everything. We need a confrontation. Come tomorrow. Semyonova and the kid in the ward have been stolen." Now Barbara could breathe easy. Her life didn't seem to be in any danger, but she couldn't sleep at night. She dreamed of an enraged Dennis with an axe, then little Polly's little girl being carried away by the river. And in the morning she went to the very same address to meet her childhood friend. The door was opened by a young woman in a wheelchair. "Hello, what did you want?" she asked idly, looking somewhere past Barbara. "Polly, it's me," Barbara the visitor said quietly. "You don't remember me?" The woman shuddered and turned pale. It had been a long time since she had been called by her real name.
She gazed into Barbara's face. "Yes, I recognize you. You were a childhood friend of mine," Barbara whispered softly. "Polly, have you come?" She rushed to Polly's lap and hugged and teased her. Both sobbed for the joy of meeting her and for the grief they had both suffered.
After they had calmed down, the women sat straight in the hallway holding hands for a long time. Then Barbara helped Polly into a chair and sat down beside her. Tell me everything," she begged her friend. "When I was swept away by the current, I tried desperately to survive, tried to get out of the current somehow. And then my strength ran out and I lost consciousness. I only remember being pulled out of the water by strong male hands. It was a gypsy named Peter. His tabor was not far from the shore. Peter was fishing and saw me drowning. That's how I ended up living with the gypsies. I must have hit my head hard because I couldn't remember anything about myself. They gave me the name Mary, and that's how I became Mary Gypsy. I didn't go to school, wandered around with the gypsy kids, begging for money from passers-by. And you know, I like that kind of life." Once, when I was standing at a crosswalk, a woman came up to me. She was surprised to see a blonde girl together with a Roma, and she called the police. I was taken to an orphanage, leaving that name behind, a name I never remembered. My past came to me in a dream. 10 years later, I remembered everything: my parents, you, and my childhood. I was studying at the institute at the time. I rushed to my native village, but no one was waiting for me there. My dad and mom had died. Strangers had been living in the apartment for a long time. So she remained alone with her grief and this memory, which she no longer needed. "Why didn't you find me?" Barbara asked excitedly. "I would have been glad to know that you were alive and I would have helped you." "I looked," replied Polly, grinning bitterly, "but you had no one at home. The neighbor threw me out, said you'd gone to town.
Where did she say you'd gone to? She didn't tell the truth, Barbara said, horrified. I was the one who lived in the city, but my parents stayed in the village. I see. That neighbor always disliked my mother and was jealous of her, but it doesn't matter. Hey, what do the doctors say?
They said there's a slim chance. It's been too long since that rich guy Dennis Semenoff made a pass at me and threatened to blame me if I told anyone. He gave me money for the cheapest medicine and drove off.
Barbara turned pale.
And this Semenoff is now called Dennis. Yes, that's right, Polly answered. A tall brunette. And how do you know him? He's my husband, said Barbara. You know, he wanted to kill me. My lawyers already started divorce proceedings against him. By the way, Dennis is in jail. I'm on my way to the coroner's office right now, and I'll take you with me. You'll tell him everything. He should be punished on all counts. In fact, from now on, you're going to live with me until you get better. Then we'll see.
Do you have enough room for me? I'm in a wheelchair, said Polly, worried. It'll be all right, Barbara smiled. Dennis was frightened when he saw both of his victims in front of him. Polly was shaking with fear too, but Barbara took her hand and squeezed it tightly, supporting her friend, and Polly told the police everything due to the newly discovered circumstances. Dennis had another criminal case thrown at him, which meant that he would not be free for a long time.
Barbara and Polly were released. When Polly saw the house she was to live in, she was almost speechless. It was a luxurious mansion in a verdant garden, as if it had come from an artist's painting. From the excess of feelings, the guest cried. Oh, my dear friend, Barbara soothed her. Now you are in this house too. You will soon walk on this lawn with your own feet. Barbara kept her word. Polly was operated on a week later. Her friend insisted that Polly be rehabilitated in the mansion, not in a hospital bed. Barbara hired the best rehabilitator and nurse for this purpose. A few months later, Polly was gingerly taking her first steps. By her side were Barbara and Bobby Buddy, who loved Polly with all his heart and wanted to lick her nose every time. It was a great help in her recovery. You look sad, Barbara said. Look, you're doing well, and life's getting better. What's wrong? You know, I didn't tell you everything, Polly confessed to her friend. I didn't want to dump all my problems on you. I look at Bobby and I think of my daughter, Jennifer. What? Barbara was surprised. You have a daughter? Yes, but she was taken from me by my husband and my mother-in-law, Laura Pauline. That woman immediately disliked me because I was poor as a church mouse. She wanted the best for her son, and he chose me. Then Jenny was born and George went off on a bender. They took the baby away from me in the divorce, said mean things about me in court, scared my daughter. Now they won't even let us see each other. What a nightmare. But we're not going to let it go, Barbara exclaimed, so I'm calling my lawyer. Let's get our daughter back. So Barbara decided to visit her friend's neglectful relatives, but for that she needed Daniel. Their relationship was already in full swing, and with him to go, George was not afraid at all. She was protected by her lover when Barbara's expensive foreign car driven by Daniel pulled up to Polly's ex-husband's house. Laura Pauline spotted them through the window at once, but assumed the stern look of a businesswoman. Barbara knocked decisively. She knew how to talk to people like that. Daniel was already standing behind her, posing as a bodyguard. The door was opened by her mother, with George peering timidly behind her. Is that who's running things around here? Barbara thought. She said aloud. Hello, is this the Konyukova residence? I'm looking for George Andreevich. Yes, here the landlady replied warily. What did you want from him? I'll only talk to him. And who are you? I beg your pardon, Barbara said. I'm Polly Konyukova's representative. Hello, said a middle-aged man, coming out of the back of the house. What does she want? Don't you understand? Barbara was surprised. You deprived her of her parental rights and the opportunity to raise her own daughter. When my client was in a defenseless position, or rather lying in the hospital after the accident, I am authorized to withdraw the court decision, as well as to file a counterclaim, thanks to which you will not only give the child, but also pay a large sum of money for moral suffering caused to her. And I can also bring the case to criminal punishment. As they say, if there's a man, there's an article. So what are we going to talk about here on the doorstep? Mom, the cowardly son, called out.
And immediately Laura Pauline, as if she were a dear guest, began to call Barbara and Daniel into the house. A crowd of onlookers had already gathered around them.
Come in, make yourselves comfortable. You're the hostess here. I'll organize some tea. We don't mind making a deal. Why start a criminal case right away? My son is a good man, he hasn't broken any laws. We'll find out, Barbara said dryly. And if George doesn't mind, he can write it here.
Barbara handed him the agreement, which stated that Jennifer would be taken into her mother's custody and that George would drop his lawsuit for termination of his wife's parental rights. A terrified George signed it.
Where's the baby? Barbara asked. Laura Pauline brought in a skinny, blonde-haired girl who looked exactly like Polly when she was a baby. Do you want to go to Mommy's? Barbara asked Jennifer. Yes, I do. I miss her so much, Jennifer shouted and rushed to Barbara, seeking protection from the strange woman. And they're hurting me. What do you mean they're hurting you? Barbara exclaimed. Daniel, call the police. The police arrived and recorded the beatings in the child's testimony. Barbara and Daniel were witnesses. George's parental rights had been terminated. Now he had a taste of justice. His mother only cursed her hated daughter-in-law. Mommy Jennifer ran up to Polly as she was doing calisthenics with her trainer. Polly couldn't believe her eyes. She jumped up, but staggered. Daniel held her up. Everyone cried. The picture of the reunion of inseparable mother and child left no one indifferent. Buddy lay beside Polly and touched her with his paw. Bobby stood at a distance and watched enviously as the strange girl found her mother. Barbara came up to him and whispered softly, "Do you want to be my son?" Bobby looked up at her with eyes full of tears. "I'd love to have a mom like you." "Well, then, let's hug," Barbara suggested to Valerie. "I love you so much." And in the evening they decided to celebrate the arrival of Jennifer to their extended family and the acquisition of Bobby and Mom. Daniel John tried the hardest. When everyone was seated at the table on the terrace, he turned to Barbara, Valerie, and said, "My friends, I ask you to be witnesses of my happiness. Barbara, Valerie, you will be my wife." And Daniel John handed her the ring. Barbara Valerie was not ready for such an event, but happily said yes, and Bobby clapped his hands with happiness. "Congratulations," Jennifer told him. "Now you have both a daddy and a mommy." After dinner, the children went to play in the clearing, and the adults sat at the table and talked for a long time, the more so because there were a lot of common topics. Meanwhile, quick Bobby and quiet Jennifer quickly found a common language, and the boy decided to show the new girl all his secret places where he liked to hide. One of them was an old abandoned house not far from Barbara Valerie's mansion. It was there that he took his curious girlfriend. "It looks like a bandit's den," he boasted. "Look, there are even old boats here. We could go fishing." "Oh, what's the stove like?" Jennifer marveled. "Your fairy tales."
"I'll bring the dolls in here and make a house for them," she said. Bobby wanted to reply that it wasn't a dollhouse, but a very real pirate fort, but he didn't have time. The children heard a thud, as if something heavy had fallen, and smelled the acrid odor of smoke. It was the house rebuildings burning. "We've got to get away," shouted Bobby, "but there's somebody out there." "I heard a strange sound," insisted Jennifer. "What if there's a dog in there that can't get out?"
Bobby was frightened that it might have been arson and rushed into the vegetable garden, which was already taking fire. But it wasn't the dog. "Jennifer, help," shouted the girl. Jennifer came running to the call and was stunned with shock. Before her lay a puny little grandfather whom Bobby was endeavoring to drag by the legs. "Grab his arms. Let's carry him," Bobby commanded, and the room was already filling with smoke. The fire was spreading fast. The boys were coughing. It was difficult to get the though small but heavy grandfather out. "Where's the exit?" Jennifer shouted. "I don't know," answered Bobby. "Pull. Come on." Suddenly the boys were pulled outside by Daniel John's strong arms. "Wait here. And don't go in the house," he said menacingly, and rushed inside. The children dared not disobey him and sat obediently at a safe distance. In a minute, Daniel John carried the haggard stranger out in his arms. The clothes and face of both were covered in soot. Daniel John brought the tramp to his senses. Grandpa opened his eyes and looked at his rescuer in surprise. Where? Who am I? He was clearly ill. Barbara Valerie and Polly Patricia were already running toward the cabin and had called the fire department. And soon, as Grandpa was being taken to the hospital, he suddenly looked at Polly Patricia and said, "Daughter, won't you leave me?" Polly Patricia cried with surprise. She had not heard herself called that for a long time, and she went with her grandfather in full determination to take him to her. She could not leave the unfortunate man to his fate, as had once happened to her. The doctors did their best to restore the patient's memory, and the unfortunate grandfather slowly began to remember everything. Now he knew where he came from, and that his name was Michael Arcady. He had Polly Patricia by his side at all times. Michael Arcady said to Polly Patricia, "You should go home. I'm not comfortable. What are you?" "Uncle Michael, I'm not leaving you. Let's go home together. You don't have to suffer alone." Barbara Valerie said, "We'll all live together." "You have a family now," Polly reassured him. At the word family, Michael Arcady's face changed. "But I have a son who has forgotten the common people. He's gotten too high and arrogant." That kind of thing, he worried. "And so how did you end up in an abandoned house?" Polly Patricia asked. "I wanted to see my son with one eye, but on the way I was robbed by some subhumans, knocked on the head, and had all my money taken. I don't remember how I got to that house and what happened to the fire. If it wasn't for the guys, we wouldn't be talking right now. They're going to help find my son," Uncle Michael replied. "Don't worry, Uncle Michael. Everything will be fine," Daniel promised John. Barbara Valerie and Daniel John and the boys were getting the room ready for the new tenant. Barbara was pleased to notice that her family was growing quickly. A week later, Michael's son Michael Arcady showed up at the hospital. A young man in an expensive suit walked into the room with 2 security guards. He looked worried. "Father, how could it be?" he exclaimed. "I'm sorry, Father. I was a fool. Polly Patricia called and told me you almost died." Michael Arcady, with trembling arms, put his arms around his son and wept. "Found me, son." Polly left the room to let them talk privately. She stood at the open window and enjoyed the fresh breeze. Suddenly someone touched her shoulder. It was Maxim. "Thank you for taking care of my father. Not everyone could do that. Especially me. I was being selfish. What can I do in gratitude?" "You don't need to do anything," Polly smiled. "Just be a good son. I've grown attached to Uncle Michael. Don't deprive me of his companionship. He wants to live with us. But if you object, tell him. Let him live where he's comfortable," Maxim agreed. "I hope he'll want to move in with me later, but I don't seem to have as much fun as you do. My father told me how friendly you are. I envy you. You should come visit us. Uncle Michael will be glad." Polly understood Maxim and was grateful to him for it. They did not notice how happy Michael's grandfather was watching them and asked his son to walk Polly home, promising that nothing would happen to her.
"Go and get some rest. There's no use fiddling with an old man. I'm still in my right mind," Michael Arcady said, as he walked his favorite.
Uncle Michael hoped that the spark in his son's eyes at the sight of sweet Polly would grow into something more and his child would find marital happiness, and so it did. All the while Michael Arcady was recovering in the hospital, Maxim was living at Barbara Valerie's house.
Having sent his guards home to another city, where he came from, Max temporarily settled in the mansion. A favor, the house had many rooms and could accommodate many guests. Now the house was filled with voices and noise in the kitchen. Everyone was gathering in the dining room for breakfast. It seemed that the whole family lived in the house, which delighted the hostess.
At first Max was surprised by the abundance of friendliness and openness of new acquaintances, but then quickly joined the family and was no longer bored. He enjoyed the antics of the children and even the barking of Buddy, the dog who greeted him after work. Max had decided to move his office closer to Barbara's house, where his father seemed to have shed the extra years and become more active. Michael Arcady's eyes glistened with joy, and the children kept Grandpa busy. "Grandpa, come to the river with us," Bobby begged. You promised you'd teach me how to fish, didn't you? Michael Arcady had long dreamed of grandchildren. His son Max was so busy that he didn't even have a family. However, everyone noticed that between Max and Polly began a romantic relationship. This was realized even by the children, who shouted to them, "The bride and groom are coming," and kicked out poor Polly in the paint. You can't fool a child's mind. Max announced to everyone that he intended to marry Polly since Daniel and Barbara had also decided to legalize their relationship. It was decided at a big family council to have a double wedding. "Here's the joy," shrieks from Bobby and Jennifer and loud cheers from the two happy couples. Michael Arcady gave the grand speech. Then all evening long, music blasted from Barbara's garden, caressing the ears. Neighbors would drop in to see what was so interesting going on in a house that had previously been closed. But when they learned the reason, they heartily congratulated the young, sincerely rejoicing at the pleasant changes. It turned out that none of them loved Dennis. A month later, a big wedding, to which were invited all the neighbors, friends, and colleagues. There was a huge marquee in the garden of Barbara's house. Two beautiful brides and their groomsmen adorned the presidium of one large table, which was bursting with treats. Beside them sat parents and children, congratulating the young ones and giving their blessing. Only Polly had no father and mother. There were tears in her eyes. Michael Arcady sat down next to her and hugged his daughter-in-law. "Daughter, don't cry, you have us. You're the closest thing I have to family, honey, and I won't let anyone hurt you," he said. "Thank you," said Polly, resting her head on his shoulder. She was happy, for she had a family around her, a daughter, a loving husband, and a father who would do anything for her. From behind her, someone's hand fell gently on her shoulder. It was Barbara, who was like a sister to her.
Oliver hated being called a bum, a beggar, or a tramp. He preferred the socially neutral term free artist. He had felt that way long before he had been on the street. What was he, really, a bum? It was just that living within four walls was weighing him down. Besides, he really was an artist. Once his paintings were popular and in demand. In those glorious times, he even held several chamber exhibitions in small galleries. A dozen critics called the work significant, and a couple more disgusting ointment. At that moment, the artist didn't care what some underachievers said about him. Customers paid off solid fees for portraits, which Oliver, in his own apt expression, wrote the heel of a jackleg. It is not that he bathed in money, but the need did not know, and enjoyed widespread fame in narrow circles. However, fortune is a capricious girl, and after many years of upsurge, after worldly fame and relative wealth, can always come a period of oblivion. For Oliver, that time dragged on. First, he sent a gallery owner on a pedestrian journey who tolerated all his antics and picked up customers. Here's what George, the artist, said that day. "You're literally stealing from me. You're forcing me into some kind of channel where I'm cramped. I'm going free, do you hear me?" What George said, Oliver couldn't remember. Then he proudly slammed the door, leaving his apartment. He left his shamed wife and children, who by then were relatively mature and tired of his antics, and went on a free voyage. At first, everything was fine. His own studio, clients, sitters, and wine, a whole sea of wine, in which he began to choke every now and then. "You'll come back to me." Helga, his lawfully wedded wife, shouted at him as he left with a small suitcase. "You'll come crawling back on your knees." "I will," Oliver replied with a smile. "That's what you were before me, huh? Just a little shop girl. And now, an artist's wife. Sounds proud, doesn't it?" As he left Helga, the free artist smiled. He never fought at all, cutting bridges. It's just that life in one marriage, in one gallery, was weighing on him, especially all these conventions, to sleep at home, to be faithful to his wife, not to bring to the apartment of favorite women, not to sell Nojeko paintings to random customers, and not to exhibit in other galleries. Of course, the wife could tolerate this at the beginning of their life together. Oliver's lifestyle seemed to her bohemian and suing respect. She also saw him as a genius, but gradually the free-spirited artist became too voluminous a figure for their modest third-floor apartment. There were high ceilings of more than 3 meters, but even that was not enough for the flight of the soul. The gallery, which brought him a good income, also became too cramped. He saw himself as a rising star of world painting, but the outlines were ghostly. He was going to conquer Paris, Berlin, Madrid, one by one. And he would have, if it hadn't been for a morbid addiction to alcohol. So he left both the gallery and the apartment, where he even thought of going out of the window. But the third floor is too small for that flight, which sometimes allow themselves to make a saturated life creators. That's why Oliver went out not through the window, but through the door, and has been wandering the world for 10 years. "You are not a bum," said to him another acquaintance over a bottle of cheap wine. "You're the best artist in the world." "No," Oliver replied flirtatiously. "The best, but not in the world, but in the country." "You're a genius," continued the acquaintance, enjoying a drink at someone else's expense. "No, not at all," objected the artist. "I am not a genius, but outstanding, but only to find my paints, brushes, and sketches." Casual acquaintances did not stay with him longer than there was money left for food and drink. The older Oliver got, the worse his teeth and hair looked. The fewer women became willing to take him in and model for him. And now the thought of returning to Helga didn't seem quite so frightening anymore. Especially since he knew that half of the apartment still belonged to him, and that he could find a job as a decorator, or a painter at the worst. He could work with large volumes and liked it too, but his pride wouldn't let him. This quality, without which it is unthinkable to achieve success in any field, is gradually becoming a yoke, a burden that dragged him to the bottom, into a pool of wine and vices. That morning, the chief physician's anxiety was at its peak. His best quality is intuition. It worked well in diagnosis, but it did not help at all in management. He had an intuitive sense of what a person was like, but he didn't always understand what to do about it. So when the phone rang in his office, he already realized that he would not hear any good news. "Unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to you," the velvet voice on the other end of the wire did without preamble, and did not tolerate objections. "Really?" Andrew perked up. "Why?" "You are unable to clean up the hospital," the voice said. "Our orders have not been executed for months." "I dare to disagree," said the chief physician, loosening his tie. In principle, if he was going to argue with the court, it was only for pro forma. In fact, he was glad of the unexpected freedom. The hospital was in perfect order. The occupancy rate is less than 90%. The recurrence rate is very low. "How long will you put up with the ritual store near the main entrance?" the voice asked. "How many complaints do we have to listen to before we reach your mind? Or at least your heart? What does it mean to tolerate?" The former chief physician was perplexed. A ritual store for the hospital is quite a thing. Their people can buy everything they need if something goes wrong, and in general, what are you implying? "Me?" the voice interjected. "You should have told me that a month ago." Silence. Andrew really couldn't and didn't like to lead. All affairs were handled by his deputies, to whom he gave full freedom of action. In fact, he was the one who started the funeral parlor of some shrewd businessman. But the hospital received money for the rent, and also, according to Andrew's firm belief, the proximity of such an institution should discipline the patients. "I'm giving you one last chance," the voice said. "I was persuaded to fire you for incompatibility with your position, but you understand. You won't be able to. I get the hint." Andrew reported cheerfully. "It's easy. I'll write a letter right now, but don't forget that I am a materially responsible person. To whom will I transfer the household? What if the new person is missing something?" "For this do not worry," assured the voice. make an inventory, and leave the business. The new head doctor is not your concern." The voice hung up. Andrew sighed. This is not how he had imagined his departure. In fact, it's even better. There would be no proceedings, lavish send-offs, and tears of longing. He would write a statement, leave his keys, and goodbye. He couldn't wait to get back to practicing medicine. Better yet, to go to some remote village with 10 houses and treat there. That's where the life is. That's where the real challenges are. To lead a large hospital, he liked at first, but gradually all the pleasure came to naught. Half the time all he did was sign papers and deal with the complaints of disgruntled patients. "Christopher," Andrew said, pressing the call button. "Christopher, dance. You're going to have a new boss. The weather can be nice in September, but it's best not to take any chances." That's why Oliver wore a raincoat. You never know when it's going to start raining. Winter was coming soon, so the free artist had to find a temporary home. He had an option in mind. His once good friend, whom he called not an artist, but a craftsman. To ask him for help, he had to step on his own pride. After making his way to the private sector, he went through the open gate without a bell and knocked on the door of the cottage. After a couple of minutes of waiting, a friend appeared in the doorway, and his face could not be called pleased. "Hello, Vance," Oliver said courteously and bowed, standing on the doorstep to his longtime friend. "Long time no see, friend. I was just passing by, so I thought I'd stop by and see how you were doing. I'll see if you've restored the gazebo that I destroyed last time due to my gross negligence." "What do you want?" The man answered rudely. "Are you trying to make a pig of me again? Or a whole pig farm, eh?" With Vance in the past, they had a long-standing collaboration. Both artists, they had taken very different paths. If Oliver was really looking for concentrated freedom, Vance was looking for enrichment. If Oliver was in demand with women and drew inspiration from them, Vance was never really loved. This information, of course, had to be kept in mind and kept to himself. But the free artist could not. At the last creative evening, which rolled into a banal feast, Oliver told Vance everything he thought about him. He did not keep silent about the greed of his comrade, who not a dozen times helped him financially. And lastly, he burned the carved arbor, admiring the flames of his favorite element. It was about 6 months ago, and since then the entrance to the hospitable house of the old comrade was closed. "I should like to spend the night," Oliver asked, as if nothing had happened. "To go to your bathhouse. I'd like to make pies on your charming stove. By the way, did you put the tandoor together like you dreamed?" "That's a wrap," Vance replied, not leaving the doorway. Oliver was looking for a way to get ahead, to sit on the living room couch, and then God himself wouldn't be able to kick him out. "Why don't you put my youngest daughter in the bed? To keep your old bones warm?" Considering the age of the artists, and each of them is close to the 6'10", the proposal did not seem so vulgar, and the daughter is long since matured and overripe. She was 30, and Vance had given up hope of getting her out of her creative home and into someone else's marriage. "I'm sorry, friend," Oliver said. "I overreacted that time. I was wrong, I was rude, I was unfriendly. I let down a man I should have been proud to know, and I. The artist rolled his eyes and raised the elbow of his hand to his face, depicting sincere remorse. "Really?" Vance marveled, shifting to a whisper. "Only that time? Or do you only think of my friendship when you need a place to sleep and a drink?" "Well, and all the times before that," agreed the free artist. "Yes, you're right. I don't know how to value either friendship or love. I've betrayed 100 times the people I should have held on to. There must be a flaw in my soul, somewhere in my heart, a little demon that's undermining me from the inside." My God, what a speech. Vance admired him insincerely and splashed his hands. "But I've lost count of the number of times you've said something like that. 10? 20? It's about time you thought of something else." "Vance, you have to understand," Oliver pleaded. "Winter is coming, and I have nowhere to go. So you want to stay with me again until spring? Is that why you've come all this way, clopping around in your worn-out boots?" "Of course," Oliver rejoiced. He took the rough tone as an unspoken agreement. "We'll have a great time. I'll write a dozen pieces for you. You can sell them and make good money. My name is still remembered and my paintings are waiting, right?" Of course, Oliver was being dishonest. He'd started several mediums in his friend's studio at his own request, but he'd never finished a single one. And given his specific technique, it was unlikely that anyone had managed to complete the projects. Besides, Oliver flatly refused to paint exactly what the master of the house demanded, and the resulting smudge would hardly sell for good money, if at all. "Don't spoil my canvases and paints." Vance was indignant. He was ready to forgive his comrade once again, but the mention of unfulfilled orders was the last straw. He was the one who had to work day and night in the workshop to meet the deadline. He was such an overly obliging man. "For the love of God, please don't touch the brushes in my house." "So you're letting me in?" Oliver asked with a smile. He interpreted Vance's mood in his own way. "I could tell you a lot of things, you know, but you're better with your tongue. I could never do that." "So just, no," the former comrade said and slammed the door loudly in Oliver's face. This world had never been so cruel to a freelance artist. If even his best friend left him alone on the cold streets, who could he rely on? Of course he was unfair to Vance. Too often, he called him a lowlife, a talentless person, an imitator, an opportunist, a canvasser, mocked his commissioned canvases, laughed at the way Vance himself makes frames with a mitre saw and thus extracts an extra penny from the order, emptied his home bar with such speed that the owner had to hide wine and cognac in hiding places on the plot. But Evan nodded with restraint, though his medical sense told him that he would not like this big official's offer. Since he had poured a bucket of flattery on him, he was about to be asked to do something that he wouldn't do in his right mind. Which, in principle, you could refuse, but "I don't think you came all this way just to give me a favorable review," Evan said. "Though I do appreciate being seen and recognized for my efforts." "Right," Jack smiled. "What if I told you that a small but very affluent town needed a chief physician? A well-known cardiac hospital?" Evan immediately grew sad. There were many hospitals on the map of his vast homeland. Where things were going well, chief physicians could lead for decades, and where there were problems, the chiefs changed periodically. And where there hadn't been a real owner for a long time, it was hard to build a system from scratch. "What city?" Evan asked, even though he already knew what we were talking about. "The city you know best," Jack smiled. "The city that gave us such a promising and brilliant doctor." "No," Evan cut him off. "I'm definitely not going there." The smile never left Jack's face. An experienced official, he knew which strings to pull, which keys to press to get the right tune. And if the doctor couldn't be bribed with flattery, he had to use the heavy artillery. It's something he knew and loved. "Rumor has it," the official yawned, "that you can't find texture for your work." "Work?" Evan was surprised. "Well, with good results." Jack stretched out, "With the right persistence." "Damn it, nothing is impossible in this world, my dear colleague." Evan repeated in a tone that brooked no objection, "And I'll be challenged by someone who actually knows medicine, not a pretender." 2 years. The official savored these words like an expensive wine. "Will you really have time, my dear colleague? And will I have time to convince everyone?" "I'll work nights." In that case, Jack's smile became even wider, which seemed contrary to anatomy. "In that case, we need to discuss the details. And choose a date on which you're ready to begin your duties. I'll turn in my files and get to work. Friday at the latest." The official stood up, adjusting his jacket. Evan hated healthcare workers who favored formal dress. He himself always wore what he was comfortable in. That's what you can do to help a patient in a jacket and white shirt. "One last thing," muttered the official. "Start working at the hospital by looking for new deputies. The ones we have are no good, if you say so." After his conversation with Jack, Evan felt as if he'd done something immoral. Should he have accepted a transfer to another hospital, even if it was as chief of medicine? He cherished the hope that as soon as he became a candidate of medical sciences, he would immediately break into the vertical of medical power and bring order there, so that hospitals and polyclinics would receive not only criticism, but also equipment and medicines. Still, the feeling was sickening. Why had he said he was coming to the new place on Friday? What was the rush? It was already Wednesday. Evan went to the smoking room he'd been avoiding for a year and a half. And there he met the man whose help he needed right now. "Give him a smoke," he asked Carlo, his friend and longtime colleague. "You quit," the doctor replied, taking a cigarette out of the pack. "Yes," Evan agreed, lighting up, and picked it up again. "I'm transferred. Tomorrow is the last day. Will now be the head doctor." "I heard that," Carlo smiled. "Rumors have been going around the hospital for a week. Congratulations." The smoke burned his lungs. Why is he the last to hear the news? When the big official from the Ministry of Health had announced his arrival, he had already suspected the possibility of a promotion, but he wasn't sure. Carlo could have at least hinted at it. "I'm not happy about it. I've always dreamed of being a chief physician, but not in this hospital. Any reason?" Carlo asked. "Yes, there are. Deeply personal." "Is it a lot of work?" "No," Evan shook his head. "There's a patient there, you know. One I don't want to cross paths with." "Patient?" Carlo was surprised. "Where are you and where are the patients, Evan? Are you going to celebrate the promotion or not?" "Only in a small circle. A very small circle." Cars were passing by, but they didn't care about a homeless man about to throw himself off a bridge. No one even slowed down to shout encouragement. After the foot got stiff, the free artist put it on the ground. Now they had to wait for the cramp to pass. In half an hour, only one patrol car had stopped near Oliver. The bridge, spanning high over the river, was the main attraction of the area. The water gave Oliver inspiration, and he had once painted a series of landscapes depicting the enchanting place. "Come on, jump." Thomas demanded it. "Jump. The whole town will breathe a sigh of relief." "I'll keep going." The police inspector, if he followed all the instructions, was supposed to stall and dissuade suicides from jumping into the abyss, and also to furtively call a psychologist, so as not to provoke the person to take decisive action. But Thomas had deviated from the instructions by 180 degrees. He was fed up with the antics of Oliver, who thought he was a brilliant artist. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked. "I didn't have time," the artist replied. "Then fly away. How long am I going to stand here and cheer you up?" At this time of year, the vagrant usually left the city and went to winter in warmer places. And there he'd piss off the local police with his inability to live in society. This year it's all gone wrong, which means trouble and more work. Thomas was being ironic when he suggested that the artist jump, but it was a joke about his secret desires. "You've got to stall me," Oliver objected, "as if you don't know the instructions." "I do," Thomas replied. "I know, that's why I'm going to confront you while no one is looking. Come here, come closer." Oliver was always messing up the townspeople's lives, mostly with his words and vulgar pictures, which the artist considered masterpieces. And it would be all right if the tramp did something serious and disappeared from sight for a long time. Thomas knew from experience that in penitentiaries there was a high demand for those who could draw. No, the antics would be of a kind that could not be expected to last for a long sentence of 15 days at most. The free artist did not argue with the guardian and stepped away from the low railing. He raised his hands, showing that he realized his mistake and changed his mind. "I understand," he replied. "I get it. Thanks to your heartfelt words, Thomas, I have decided to abandon my shameful scheme." and continue to bring bright colors to this grey earth. Can you give me a ride to the hospital? All right, get in, Thomas nodded. Only on the paper. And don't ever leave the hospital. Do you hear me? 4 is deceiving. The homeless know it especially well. You can be sweltering hot during the day and freezing cold at night. In their city, the range of temperatures was extremely wide, and while during the day in September some people managed to sunbathe and even swim a little in the river, at night the frost on the grass or car windows could turn to ice. That was why Oliver wanted so badly to wait out the months ahead. Otherwise, October would have to be spent in some basement or attic. For a while after his wife left him, he had a workshop that was supposed to be heated with a wood stove. Oliver had been told 100 times that the wood should be loaded into the furnace gradually, not to heat the stove to red hot. But what do these people know about art? Once, when he had a session with a charming model, he overdid it. The model wouldn't let go of her bra until the temperature in the studio was close to acceptable levels. So he loaded the stove to the limit and splashed kerosene to be sure. Of course, that house did not burn down. The fireman, who immediately arrived at the call and thoroughly doused the hearth of the fire, prevented it. But all 5 floors below the attic were seriously damaged by water. Not only his work, but also his pride died in this element. So when the frost comes, he'll have to seek survival in the basement. When I was in jail, liked to tell the artist after this incident. In fact, for violation of fire safety, he was arrested for only 15 days. Some hotheads at the time wanted to make the artist pay, but what can you take from him? Since then, Oliver was panic-stricken by Borgias, preferring to warm himself with firewater. The artist liked the cardiac hospital. The main building was 8 stories high, and not only locals were sent here. There is always someone to talk, fight, and drink with. Excellent canteen. If you know how to be persistent, they'll feed you well. The appearance was somewhat spoiled by the proximity of the ritual store. It was located in an annex near the main building, as if to suggest that it was waiting for patients who were not ready to follow the doctor's recommendations. Oliver didn't mind the proximity, for he wasn't afraid of death. He would have to wait out the future frosts, hold out a little, and then the strait would be waiting. Alas, the medical registrar was not inclined to share his aspirations. "Patient, keep order," the woman asked. For 10 minutes now, she had been trying to explain to the free artist that becoming a hospital patient was not so simple. "We shouldn't hospitalize you without a referral. Don't hold up the line or I'll be forced to call security." She's new, isn't she? The threat made no impression on Oliver. As soon as the guard saw the troublemaker, he hid in his booth and just watched through a slit in the ground. Near the registrar's office, there was a decent queue. The artist was preventing those who really needed help from getting it. "And I say, you should not, but obliged to hospitalize me," shouted Oliver. "My health is disgusting. Look how my hands are trembling." The artist stretched out his palm. The tremor was visible to the naked eye. However, after so many years of drinking and wandering, it was a relatively minor problem. It was worse when it came to filling his stomach. Oliver hadn't had a poppy in his mouth since morning, and he was hungry and thirsty. "Man, I've told you for the last time, it's not allowed," the receptionist replied patiently. "First get a referral in the district polyclinic, then undergo an examination, take tests, and then welcome to the hospital. I do not have so much time," pathetically shouted Oliver. I'm dying. I need immediate, urgent care." "Next," said the receptionist, and turned away from the free artist. The angry crowd shifted the old man to the very edge of the counter. Outraged, Oliver was still making noise and swearing for a long time. He said that he had given himself to this city and people by immortalizing them both on dozens of canvases. Claimed he'd ruined his heart by worrying about the future of the locals. Like Michelangelo, he spent nights in the studio creating masterpieces, ruining his eyesight. He asked at least for free food vouchers in the canteen. But the crowd didn't listen to him and lived their own lives. "I'll complain," Oliver said finally, stopping at the guard's booth. "I'll go to the head doctor, then come back tomorrow," the man said. "There's a new head doctor on Friday, and we'll see if he'll listen to you." "Who said that?" the painter asked. The voice sounded familiar to him. But there was no one in the booth, not even after Oliver had bent over to look inside. "No one," the guard answered, continuing to hide. "No one said there's no one here. Just go already. The sanitarium is cancelled." And when the artist had moved a safe distance away, the guard rose and added, "That Walker. Modern genius. Damn him." It was not a flight, however, but a diversion, for Oliver was not going to surrender without a fight. Retreating to the main entrance, he made one last attempt to storm the building. It was a busy Thursday afternoon outside the hospital. If he faked a heart attack believably enough, he'd be admitted to the hospital. It's all about believing himself. What does a heart attack look like? As he stepped out onto the porch, Oliver suddenly shrieked, putting all his artistry into his voice and movements. "Help! People! Help me! I'm dying! Oh, farewell, motherland!" and collapsed on his knees. Apparently, the sudden action, hunger and forced sobriety had made him really dizzy. Oliver felt that he really didn't feel well, began to gulp air like a fish. The sounds began to drift away, and the picture first turned green and then dim. He grasped the handrail with all his might, but his weakened fingers couldn't manage it. "Is he ill?" the woman questioned, standing in front of the free artist. "Is he really ill?" "Coldly, citizen, coldly," said the guard. He ran up to Oliver with the most experienced man, the local Zaphos, the deputy chief physician on the economic part. "Now the doctor will say." "Calm down, I'm a doctor," said the storekeeper and pretended to check his pulse. The man knew Oliver all too well. The free artist had spent a couple of years in the ward on his floor, turning the model ward into an artistic commune. And then he'd kept himself discharged for a long time, faking heart attacks every now and then. When the superintendent took the homeless man's dirty hand, ostensibly to check his pulse, he immediately wanted to disinfect his palms. "Pulse is fine," the man said to the crowd. He didn't want to check the rest of his body. "He's just a faker who's gonna make normal people run out of room in the hospital. You grab the legs, I'll grab the arms." The guard and the storekeeper dragged the beggar around the corner, where he was much less visible. "It's nothing," Christopher thought. "He'll lie down for a while and then he'll be gone." However, how he has got into the part. Indeed, Oliver did not utter a sound as they dragged him, though the way was a decent distance. The artist's head was thrown back, so the men had to be careful. "What's the matter, imposter?" said the bolder guard as they laid Oliver down on the pavement. "Nothing to say, faker." The artist only mumbled something unintelligible. His consciousness hadn't left him, but it was very foggy, and even the feeling of resentment toward those who should have helped and saved him was dulled. He thought that if it was death, it was no big deal. It wasn't painful at all, and it was hardly scary at all. He had always dreamed of meeting a creator and asking his opinion of his own works, whether they were masterpieces or cheesy. There are several reasons why a person does not want to return to his hometown. The main one is the potential meeting with people you don't want to see at all. Evan is fully committed to medicine, a noble endeavor, and he's been dedicated. Cardiology is one of the most challenging fields, but it's also one of the most promising. Starting a new patient was like walking through a minefield, but a mistake here cost the life not the doctor, but his ward. After all, more people die from heart and blood pressure problems than from armed conflicts. It wasn't just about saving lives. The cardiovascular system fascinated the doctor so much that he saw it as a model of the universe. Evan could talk for hours about how this organ is organized, why people suffocate, and how important it is to keep healthy. But his passion for medicine had a downside. At 35, He had nothing besides a dizzying career. No hobbies, no home, no wife, no children. Loneliness sometimes burdened, but there was no shortage of potential female admirers. The reason for loneliness and reluctance to return to his hometown are closely connected. His entire childhood was spent in the constant scandals of his mother and father. In the end, his father left, loudly slamming the door, which his mother has never forgiven him. Yes, Dad's temper was too difficult, but Mom wasn't exactly easygoing either. So Carlo, Evan said, filling small glasses with cognac. Let's not drink too much, it's a lot of strain on the heart. Come on, replied his colleague and former subordinate. Once a week is fine. Carlo, you're upsetting me, Evan said, deliberately serious. Cognac can be consumed only in small doses, savoring the noble drink, and monitor your blood pressure and liver function. It sounds like a toast. Carlo smiled and sipped from his glass. On the occasion of the transfer, Evan unsealed a bottle of rare and expensive cognac, which was given to him by a grateful patient. I envy you, Evan sighed. You have everything, and a wife, and a son, and a daughter. And most importantly, no ambition. You don't want to be the head of the department or the deputy chief physician. What's your secret? It's simple, Evan, Carlo answered. Think about yourself. Think about yourself. Well, you'll make indicators to the ministry. You'll get the work done. You'll reduce the death rate. You can do it, Evan. I don't doubt it for a second. What's in it for you? You're just gonna hand your skills over to these frames. Your last name, your genes? Carlo pointed to a wall hung with certificates of appreciation and diplomas. Certificates from the many courses Evan had attended crowded around it. If they were to be believed, there was simply no field in cardiology that didn't lend itself to a talented physician. You're wrong, Evan said, filling his glasses. I'm not doing all this for the ministry. I'm doing it for me. I'll get my dissertation and then I'll live. I'll get married. I don't believe it. Carlo shook his head. Why do you need a wife? You know how to do everything yourself. I think you could take out an appendix yourself, like the polar explorers, and without anesthesia. Well, you're overdoing it here, waved his hand. I'll have kids. I'll have kids. You need to choose a wife from pediatrics or nurses. They sat for 2 more hours, remembering cases from their rich medical practice. 3 years flew by like a day. Evan didn't stay anywhere for long, because moving around was easy for him. If you don't have a home or family, it's easy to move. It's all about moving up and moving forward. The main thing he had learned from his father was to hold back against his will. There were so many times in his life when he wanted to say what he thought about the other person. To humiliate, to hurt, to ironize. But medicine teaches you to spare other people's feelings, reminding you every day that you don't last forever. Evan gave himself exactly 1 day for handoffs and packing. That should be enough time to carefully pack his certificates and commendations in one box and his things in another. The departure from the physical shell took longer. Lying on the cold ground, the free artist continued to feel the breath of the wind, and a bug bit his finger painfully. But the old man did not move and stubbornly waited for the transition to a new dimension, which he had been waiting for so long. As soon as the last of his strength left Oliver, an angel flew down to him. Look, it's him. Walker, a girl's voice called out. It's him. Oliver opened his eyes wide. No, it wasn't an angel, it was a girl. There was a boy with her, too, who was not quite as expressive. They were walking together in a strange city, as adventurers should. And judging by the fact that he had never seen this couple on the streets before, they were newcomers. Yes, the color and identity seekers sometimes wandered into their town. Help, Oliver asked. Help me sit down. Are you really Walker? The girl wouldn't stop. I did a term paper on your painting. Really, nodded the artist. The guys sat him down and leaned him against the wall. Drink. The girl obligingly held out a bottle of water, but Oliver shook his head negatively. and pointed to the hand of the guy who was sipping a beer. When you come to a foreign city, everything tastes better here, even this vulgar drink. The young man thought for a moment, but gave the bottle to the old man. He literally sucked on the neck and poured every last drop into himself. "Oliver, are you sick?" the girl asked. It turns out that not just rare tourists, but those who are interested in art, have wandered into their city, and in the nameless homeless man lying near the picturesque street, recognized the artist. "Should I call a doctor?" No, my soul," Oliver replied. He was pleased to be known and remembered. "Lying here in the shadow of the street, I've been gauging perspective. I was looking for inspiration for my new paintings. You see," said the young man, addressing the angelic girl who couldn't get past Walker himself. "I told you, it's just a bum lying around. And you, bad for the artist, bad for the artist." "Peter, what are you?" the girl hissed at him. "You're embarrassing me." "Do not pay attention, it's just a joke." These words were already addressed to a new acquaintance, which she had previously seen only on the pages of a rare catalogue of paintings. "It's nothing. Artists quickly get used to criticism," Oliver said, although Peter's words hurt him. "How did you recognize me, my soul?" "There is only one famous artist in this city," shrugged the girl. "Besides, I remembered that ring on my index finger right away." Oliver looked at his hand. Indeed, his talisman, his trademark, had accompanied him throughout his career, both during his rapid rise and during his endless fall. The red stone looked like a sapphire caught in the clutches of course," answered the artist without a shadow of embarrassment. A complete exclusive, the rise and fall of Oliver Walker. Interested. The naked eye could see that the guy did not like the idea very much, but he'd come from far away, come at random, so he was ready for adventure at heart. Peter had no idea why this bum in dirty clothes his girlfriend called an artist, but in order not to quarrel, he was ready to tolerate the society of a strange man, especially since he looked harmless. Oh, that deceptive appearance. "We could use a guide," he said peacefully. "And don't worry about a glass of wine. We can let you have a bottle." "Really, Leslie?" "I don't think artists drink," said the angelic-looking girl. "Isn't that right, Mr. Walker?" "It's true, Leslie," Oliver nodded. "I hate those alcoholic liquids. I have to take them solely to induce inspiration in my soul and to make peace with the imperfections of the world around me." Things are neatly folded and organized in drawers. Letters of gratitude and certificates disappeared from the walls as if they didn't exist at all. The former head physician looked absent-mindedly at the inventory and understood nothing at all. In fact, he contemplated the figures only to avoid giving the impression of an incompetent person. "The paperwork seems to be fine," Andrew stretched out. "Are you leaving already?" Christopher, the author and executor of the inventory, asked obligingly. Even a dozen Ingalls would not be enough to uncover all his machinations. Not even coffee. No, thank you," replied the former chief physician, "and we will not convene the staff. Now we'll sign the documents, and that's it." The deputy chief physician was really upset. How will he live without this nice and completely talentless head? How will he pull off scams and receive public and invisible support? Now the former chief physician refused the farewell banquet, although he had every right to do so. He's understandable. "Why were you fired?" Christopher asked in an innocent voice. He knew the reason, of course. "Oh, Christopher, it's like in a marriage," Andrew replied seriously. "It's a bad temper." "But not with his wife." "Oh, Christopher," said the former head doctor. The words of the deputy, that he is now a nobody, somewhat hurt. But by and large, they were fair. "I think I'll rest for a while. You know, running an institution like this is hard work. Anything else you need me to sign?" Christopher was thinking about how wonderful it would be to run a hospital. There's still a lot of areas where a good businessman hasn't stepped foot. But there was one small barrier between him and being head of the hospital. Small but insurmountable, at least at this stage of Christopher's career. The tour of the city was a kilometre-long route from the hospital to Morbulus's cafe. And what else could Oliver show these young, uneducated tourists? Referring to the fact that they were going to have a long walk, the free artist offered to refresh themselves, but not to drink alcohol under any circumstances. Supposedly, it makes tourism lose its elitism. The cafe, Morbulus's, was located in the basement of an old building. There was a terrific atmosphere, for which the place was loved by both locals and guests. The good weather only enhanced the feeling of a wonderful mood. Nearby was a charming fountain with a boy and a goose, another attraction. "Can't we even have a glass of beer?" Peter asked in surprise. "Absolutely not," Oliver objected eagerly. "Although the Morbulus has its own brewery, that's no reason to confuse alcoholism with tourism. Is it real?" Leslie asked incredulously. "Or do they just dilute the concentrate and refrigerate it?" "It's the real thing," said the artist. "I dedicated a cityscape to this marvelous equipment. Would you like to check?" Oliver suggested a seat on the terrace. The weather was glorious, and he hoped that his dirty clothes would not give off an unpleasant odor here and spoil the mood of his unexpected sponsors. They took the large table the artist had pointed out to them. He himself positioned himself so that the waiter would not notice him until the last. When Mickey, the cafe worker, approached, he immediately put his hands to his sides. "You got your listeners again?" he asked, looking at Oliver. "What do you think you're doing, young man?" The artist was indignant. "My new companions have traveled a long way to enjoy the beauty of this city. I demand that their order be fulfilled as a matter of priority." "Who's paying?" Mickey asked unceremoniously. "We are paying," replied Peter with a smile. He must have misunderstood the waiter's aggression and thought it was some kind of elaborate game. "Mr. Walker said that they serve excellent beer here. We'd like to try the freshest." "Yes, bring 3 glasses of dark and 3 of light," Leslie asked. "Oh wait, you'll drink to meeting us too, won't you, Oliver?" "Well," the artist drummed his fingers on the table. "Only if you insist. But then I'd ask for more wings. These wings are great." So the waiter summarized. 3 glasses of light, 3 glasses of dark and wings. 3 servings, Peter said. "We can put down a deposit." "That won't be necessary," Mickey smiled. "Right away. I hope you know what you're doing, young people." Oliver really found an appreciative audience. A boy and a girl listened to his stories about how masterpieces were created. Anticipating a brilliant drink, he immediately became a goldsmith. The planning horizon of a beggar is narrowed down to one day, and if the future in this perspective is rosy, then you can relax. The day dissolved imperceptibly in the rays of sunset, and beer as smoothly passed into fortified wine. The tourists were quite tipsy, but the free artist could not boast of sobriety either. At such moments, he forgot that he had long ago lost his studio, lost his brushes and paints, and slipped to the bottom of life. He was awakening in him the very artist who, thanks to the efforts of unknown authors, got into the anthologies of creativity. "So when are we going?" Leslie asked. "To see the city?" "I could use a stretch." "You didn't stretch enough, my soul." The artist asked me sympathetically. "Waiter." No, I've had enough alcohol." The girl waved her hands. "I'm not even sure I can go." The incomparable Leslie. The hop unleashed Oliver not only his tongue, but also his sinful thoughts. "Have you ever done any modeling?" He, no, smiled the girl. "Why, am I suitable?" "Of course," the artist said eagerly. "You can write anything, even an angel or a femme fatale. There are such universal types that..." And Oliver went into a long story about how many models he'd had in his life. Leslie's cheeks reddened from the savory details, and Peter's fists grew leaden. He watched with anger as the low-down bum picked on his girlfriend right in front of his eyes, and she didn't seem to mind the attention. "Listen, Mr. Nemtsov." "Finally," Peter said. "Walker," corrected the artist and smiled disgustedly. Never mind. I think you've had enough to drink, and we've had enough of your drunken company. And you're not a very good guide either. The guy's diction, despite the amount of alcohol he drank, was clear. He only began to pull the vowels, as if he was trying to speak in a chant. The fact that the artist was intoxicated was evident only by his sly eyes and increasingly swaggering behavior. So, listen to me, said Oliver, finishing his third bottle of fortified wine. You're a good-looking, handsome man, but you don't even know how to live. Me? Pika asked again. He had had less to drink, but he had not had much experience in this business either. And this old man, who was only trying to humiliate him, was getting on his nerves. Do you think that if Leslie had a choice, she would be with you, a man stupid and uncreative? Would she have been with you? No, she'd leave. She'd go to an artist for emotion, for feeling. To someone who could give her not a new phone, but a storm of unrivaled feelings, immortalize her beauty on canvases, and that was the last straw. While Oliver continued his denunciation, the young man stood up, grabbed the artist, and threw him into the fountain with the chair. In flight, the artist experienced a feeling of lightness and longing. It was as if it was happening not to him, but to another person, and not in reality, but in a dream. After the splash of water on the terrace, there was a sepulchral silence. It was broken by Mickey's applause. Brilliant, said the waiter. The establishment will gladly give you a discount of 20% off the final check. It seemed to Paul that Oliver had gone to the bottom and was not coming out. Several customers ran up to the fountain to help the unfortunate man. Leslie seemed ready to fall through the ground from shame and embarrassment. Evan looked around the office to see if he'd forgotten anything important. It looked like he'd taken everything. Thanks to this madhouse, let's go to another one. For several years, he had been working as the head of the cardiology department, angry at someone, hoping for something. And now he was going to conquer a new peak. Evan was sure that one day he would be able to change the medical system so that it would turn to the patient. And along with the bureaucratic grin, it showed a nice, neat smile. So that's how we're leaving, he heard a familiar voice behind him. So we're saying goodbye, huh? Well, it's not like I'm a patient. I don't necessarily need to be treated humanely or humanized. Evan turned around. Victoria stood on the doorstep, the most talented nurse of the department, and also his favorite. She was an incredibly beautiful girl, with a chiseled figure and a charming face, but a sharp tongue. For the past 2 years, they only pretended not to meet and do not love each other. Rumors about their relationship circulated in the hospital, but Young and Happy denied them. We're not saying goodbye, Evan smiled. Am I moving to another planet? I'll be 100 kilometers away from you. Do you know how often we'll see each other? Once a month, at least. Victoria chuckled to make another barb, but suddenly cried. Cardiologist inwardly was ready for any claims, jealousy, shouting, but not for tears. This female weapon instantly forced him to declare surrender. And now he, initially ready to clarify relations, suddenly softened instantly. And he began to think how to calm the favorite, and at the same time to explain to her that the final separation is not in his plans. Victoria, come on, he said. I wanted to leave without saying goodbye. You're a fool, Evan, replied the girl. You're a PhD in English, but you're a fool. To league in English, you have to be an Englishman, and you, my cosmopolitan, can leave only foolishly. Vuka had recently turned 25, and all the nurses she had started working with after college had either gone off to study to be doctors or had jumped out and gotten married and gone on maternity leave. But who were they getting? Drivers, laborers, managers at most. Victoria wanted a prince. The only one available was Evan, who was more like a king in exile, an eternal wanderer, prevented from ascending to the throne by his enemies. Victoria, come on, the cardiologist said again. You and I are not saying goodbye. I believe in long-distance relationships. Really? asked the girl, and I do not believe. Do you know how many proposals I've had? Marriage? Evan was surprised. I thought we were dating. You're a fool, Evan, shouted the nurse. Job offers. I'd had all kinds of job offers. Head nurse, private clinic. You're the only reason I've stuck around. I'm waiting for you to make me happy. Evan had to admit that she was right. It was high time for him to settle down, to have a family and children. They managed to hide their relationship even from their friend Grishka. That, by the way, is not very upset about the departure of a comrade. After all, not somewhere there is going, and on the promotion. I'm sorry, Victoria, Evan exhaled. I guess I'm just not ready. I'm just not ready yet, that's all. For what? Well, for my family, the cardiologist replied. If my kid gets sick, and you know what I'm like, I'll call a concilium. We'll discuss all the stuff snot or, God forbid, upset stomach. Silly, silly Evan, Victoria said, but in a calm voice. She took her man's hand. We just have to try to do things the way people do. How? Evan asked. I asked you to keep our relationship private so you wouldn't get strangled here. Do you know how hard it is for a husband and wife to be in the same team? I could handle that, Victoria replied defiantly. Or haven't you seen how strong I am? I mean something else. You could have introduced me to your parents, rented an apartment together. You know, in the dormitory, there are no romantic meetings. Are you really that desperate for money for me? Evan felt embarrassed. Even though he held a respectable position, he still lived in the dormitory as a lab technician. Except that they gave him a separate room, but the doctor did nothing to make it cozy. He didn't even hang a curtain on the window. Victoria lived a floor above, and she had to master the wonders of spy science so that no one would see their meeting, and he didn't provide her with any romance. If he gave her flowers, it was once a year, not more often. He never took her to the sea. True, always helped financially, but money is just a piece of paper, not feelings. It became a discovery for him that his Vicky, whom he shamelessly used for the last 2 years, also has a soul, and he seemed to have spit in that soul. Introduce her to his parents, Evan sighed, trying to change the subject and push the unpleasant feelings away. Alas, that's impossible. My parents, you know. And the cardiologist made a vague gesture, which could be interpreted in 2 ways if desired. Either absent in principle, or flew to another planet. Evan was ready to support any version, as long as he didn't tell the truth. But you have parents, Victoria shouted impatiently. I saw the lens. And they live in the same city where you go to work. You expect me to believe in such coincidences? Did you look at my documents? The cardiologist asked. Of course, replied the nurse. I need to know if you're divorced, if you pay alimony. Oh, come on. You understand. My parents are. How can I put it delicately? Well, you're not gonna like it. You got a woman in there. Victoria hissed angrily. Maybe your true love is out there waiting for you. And I'm just a substitute brigade for an urgent need. No, what are you? Said the doctor. Victoria, I realize how I look from the outside. And I realize I'm being a pig too. But you and I are adults. Can't we just? Evan, stop it. The nurse interrupted him, impatient. I believe you, but let's make a deal. If you're leaving for good. And don't call me, and don't write, and don't ask for anything. I'll never give you anything else, not one cell of my body. And I swear I'll marry the first tractor driver or combine harvester I see, whoever calls. Evan sighed. Victoria was really good for him. She not only knew her worth, she had it. And he treated her wrong, looked down on her. He used her love like he was taking raisins out of a bun. Everything tasty in his mouth and the rest on the floor. That's not right. But why didn't you think of that before? Victoria, he asked, give me a week. How about this? 1 week from now, and everything will come to a head. Either I propose to you, or we go our separate ways. Okay." The girl was silent, wondering what to say. There was a whole range of feelings on her face. She must have been trying to understand why she was wasting her time with this good but indecisive man. So, while the operation is going on and seconds count, he can make the right decision quickly. But if the question is about his personal life, he needs weeks, months, years. The answer to the indecisive suitor was forming in her mouth. "You know what, Evan?" The flight into the fountain was unpleasant, but it was sobering. The cold fall air was invigorating. Oliver thought that he'd really behaved inappropriately. But that thought existed in his head, without any remorse or desire to make amends. It was already done, so why worry about it? "Thank you," he said to Peter, who approached the bum. "Indeed, my closet should have been washed a long time ago. If you come near my girlfriend again, you hear me?" threatened the guy. I'll have you. I'll have you." "Come on, Peter, come on." Leslie ran up to him. "Oliver, I'm so embarrassed." "It's okay. I deserve it." The artist smiled. He again wanted to make an offer to work for him as a model, but changed his mind, looking at the young competitor. Very, very glad to meet you. Young people, come to our city again." A murmur reigned in the cafe. The second waiter put a tray with 2 bottles of wine and rushed somewhere inside into the bottles. He was probably going to call Thomas to have Oliver detained and brought to the station, but such a prospect was not in the plans of the free artist. He thought that any situation, even the most unenviable, could be capitalized on. Besides, Oliver had a more pressing problem. He needed to dry his clothes before night fell. Of course, it wasn't as cold as December or January, but catching pneumonia was a real possibility. Fortunately, he already had a plan of action for such an eventuality. Getting out of the fountain, he slowly strolled away, and while the attention of all the visitors was drawn to the young hero who had sent him into the swim, Oliver nimbly stole 2 bottles of fortified wine left by the waiter and hid them in his coat. He walked out of the cafe with a victorious gait, waving goodbye to the woman at the table. Oliver moved a safe distance away, fearing not so much exposure as freezing. A plan to escape a cold death had already matured in his mind. Across the street from the cafe was a park that had recently been landscaped. They had put benches, gazebos, playgrounds for children, and most importantly, braziers where you could build a fire and use it to dry things. Oliver was lucky. Someone had recently roasted meat and left warm coals. The artist threw some brushwood he had gathered nearby and began to fan the flames. There was something philosophical in it, something eternal. It is true what they say, you can look at the fire endlessly. When the branches were burning, he put a couple of logs to them, as if they had been left there for him. When he was warm enough, Oliver found a large bough, pressed it into the ground, and hung up his coat to dry. He put his boots and socks on the edge of the brazier, away from the flames. He buried his feet in the sand mixed with ashes and sat down on a log. So he spent 2 hours warming himself by the flame and sipping wine from a bottle. The blissful warmth spread both outside and inside his body. Soon all problems began to recede to the periphery of his consciousness. Also, a great idea popped into his head. Who said he couldn't go to the hospital? When it gets dark, he'll climb in through the window. He'll pick any room, lie down in an empty bed and tell the patients. Do they have every single person in there accounted for? When it was finally dark and Oliver was dead drunk, he began his difficult journey to the medical center. It was not only the darkness, which was at least diluted by the streetlights, but also the native soil. It was trying to jump up and hit him in the face. He had to put his hands out so as not to scratch his nose. Finally, the hospital buildings appeared. The free artist, although he did not consider himself an old man, was no longer suitable for acrobatic feats. Conquering the fence seemed to him like climbing a mountain peak. He urgently needed an open window to get inside. Even the second floor was an insurmountable obstacle. But he was lucky. Someone had left a window open in the hospital annex, right near the main entrance, just where the guard and some other character had taken him today. It was at this point that the elevation went down, so it was possible to get to the open window without too much labor. The free artist was jubilant once inside. In the pitch darkness, he felt how drunk he was. There was a sepulchral silence in the ward. The patients were barely breathing, and Oliver sneaked around so as not to wake them. In the darkness, he felt the bed and groped for it. It was small, narrow, and the bureaucrats were saving money on everything. There was no blanket, and the pillow was small and ridiculous. This one was definitely unoccupied. Oliver crawled onto the crib, covered himself with a sheet, and fell into a dead sleep. It was comfortable, soft, warm, and peaceful. For some reason, the bed had soft sides, but the intoxicated mind of the free artist did not pay any attention to it. The arrival of the artist did not wake anyone, although he was making a lot of noise. I wonder why. Helga couldn't help herself from the happy news. Her son was returning to the city. Not just anyone, but the head doctor of the local hospital. She couldn't believe her happiness, that such a negligent father could have such a wonderful offspring. Evan didn't spoil her with visits, but he didn't disappoint her with calls. Yesterday, he called and said, as if nothing had happened, "I'm coming home as a chief physician," that he would write a dissertation, and in general is going to reach for the stars. Helga was over the moon. She would have to bring home her old fool, and then life's journey could be considered a success. Of course, she could quite easily spend the rest of her days alone. But she felt it was her son, not her, who needed the reunion now. I could see why Evan had a grudge against her. That she could not keep Oliver, did not want to put up with his lifestyle and harsh words. And even though the artist had left her 10 years ago, she still worried about him. Worried. After all, 2 children on their feet. Where can I find him, that bastard? Vans, do you copy? Helga called a man who's got Oliver on his cell phone. "I hear you," he answered. His voice was deliberately gruff, but Vance was a good man. A good man. "Did you recognize him?" the woman asked. "Of course I recognized him," said the man. "What? Are you calling to wish me happy birthday, friend?" It was already in August, but better late than never. "Oh, sorry, Vance," said Helga. "That's not why I'm calling. Listen, I'm looking for my Oliver. Have you seen him?" "Of course I have." Vance's voice suddenly became rougher. "He came by my place the other day, you bum. He told me he loved me, but his words, old girl, are not worth the air they're thrown into. I take it you didn't accept him. You didn't believe his words." "No," the person I'm talking to answered. "Listen, I work hard. My eyes can't see anything anymore. I can barely hold this brush. And him. Sleeping in ditches, drinking bitter in buckets like a cucumber. He walked 5 kilometers to me without even panting. Does he look good?" Helga asked. She knew the answer to that question. With Oliver's health, even street life couldn't do him much harm. "Excellent." Vance confirmed her guess. "Listen, I got a call from a fellow from Morculus. He was relaxing there on the terrace. He saw such a thing." Helga thought for a moment, what are we talking about? And then she remembered the very place where she had tried her first cocktails when she was very young. Is this place still in demand among the public? "Oh, it's a cafe?" The woman was surprised. "Wow, are they still in business?" "Of course," replied Vance. "And you do not go out of the house at all?" "Oh, I go out, Vance. I go out." "So what happened there in this cafe that—" "Oh, that's right. This dummy of ours found some kids, kissed them off, and one of them almost drowned him in the fountain. He held him underwater for 3 minutes. Can you believe it? Everything bubbled up. They wanted to call the police, but he got away unharmed." Helga waved her hand. Vance always liked to embellish. "Tell you what, Vance, if you see mine, Tell him I was looking for him. I don't feel well. I'm going to die. Just say so." "What, old woman, is it true?" asked the interlocutor. "You do not dare be that, do you understand?" "I'll think about it," Helga replied and hung up. Every change for the worse, Christopher thought, sitting in his cozy office. The leather armchair perfectly fit his generally slender figure. In the corner stood an expensive electric kettle with a built-in filter, coffee maker, humidifier, and other gifts from grateful contractors. If he suddenly wanted to rest, you can lie on the leather sofa, another surprise he received after the renovation of the entryway. But there's no time to rest for Christopher. On the door is a proud, gold-embossed plaque. Deputy Chief Physician for Housekeeping. It's a work of art. The printing is even, and there's not a blemish or dot on the surface. The most beautiful plaque in the country. Christopher was sure that even the Minister of Health himself had a worse seal. He made himself, and at the same time renovated the hospital, the buildings, and the surrounding area. Alas, the available space for repair and improvement in the hospital was running out. The money was running out, and Christopher still had to renew his car and send his son to language courses abroad. He'd have to make do. When he was appointed Deputy Chief Physician, the detractors laughed. "Christopher doesn't even have a medical degree." "You're not a doctor," said one of his enemies. "You're the storekeeper. Who gave you the right to be called Deputy Chief Physician?" Christopher reacted coldly to such attacks, answering with restraint. With his detractors, he gradually sorted out, because the head cooks always have long and clean hands. Indeed, is it a joke that a man who is not directly related to medicine became Deputy Chief Physician? Christopher would answer this question in blocks. First, you have to convince everyone of your indispensability. Secondly, at all levels to create confidence that without the position of Deputy Chief Physician in the hospital, cannot do without. Thirdly, to hold on to the position tenaciously from the last strength. And then all personnel storms will pass by. The previous chief physician took little interest in the affairs of the hospital, preferring to sit in his own office. For the last year, he had not been involved in any matters at all, leaving everything to his deputies. But Christopher was always in the thick of things, making the most of them. Like today, for instance, he saw that homeless man and brilliantly impersonated a doctor to get rid of him. He acted in such a way that not a single coin in the whole hospital and in the neighborhood could not fall silently for the deputy chief physician on the economic part. His special pride was the ritual store. Christopher rented out the premises on which it had grown up for an incredible profit. Not for the hospital, of course, but for himself. The paperwork said it was supposed to be something else. What it was, he couldn't remember. Every day, inconsolable relatives came to the funeral store to say goodbye. The trade in wreaths, lamps, ribbons, and crosses flourished. Of course, the view of the memorial paraphernalia from the main entrance to the hospital was not always to the liking of patients and visitors, especially when a hearse was parked in the parking lot. But to the disgruntled, Christopher always responded philosophically. "Memento mori," said the deputy chief physician. "Remember death. We all came out of the ashes, and it's only a matter of time before we return to the ashes." Speaking of ashes, he managed to get the hospital to buy the most expensive urns in the country. Unfortunately, there was a flaw. The waste garbage cans were too sturdy and had not been written off for 4 years. It was impossible to break them. He used to renew them every year or even more often. Christopher didn't rule out the possibility that he might have to sabotage the incredibly sturdy garbage cans and buy new ones. Everything was going fine before, but now there was a new challenge. A young, very green head doctor of only 35 years old is sent to the hospital, and what Christopher had heard about him did not inspire optimism. A fanatical, totally dedicated doctor. Most likely, he would not tolerate any kind of machinations and violations. On the contrary, he would stick his long nose into Christopher's finances, or, God forbid, force him to share. The day before, on Thursday, the deputy chief physician came to one of the medical buildings where repair work was in full swing. According to the documents, they should have been finished 2 months ago. But the builders, who were hired by a clever contractor, were working very slowly. And after all, the certificates of completed work were signed long ago. The money was transferred. The previous head doctor did not get into such issues, but it is unlikely that his successor will be as malleable. "Move it, you bastards!" Christopher shouted, watching the workers. "Move, or I'll leave you penniless." But the foreman's words had no effect whatsoever. Finishers lazily wandered around the room and worked at a snail's pace. It was the kind of hopelessness and doom that slaves in ancient Rome must have worked with. Alas, Christopher was not a patrician, and therefore could not influence the slave laborers with the methods he had in mind. The chamberlain tried to calm down and pull himself together. In principle, if you work day and night, tirelessly, then by Monday it is quite realistic to finish. On Friday, the new head physician, most likely, will not delve so deeply into the affairs of the hospital. Besides, he had prepared a great program for him. Restaurant, billiards, sauna. "Come on, come on," Christopher shouted, dialing the contractor. The phone was unavailable. "Why are you shouting, father?" The builder, who smelled of wine, asked him. "There's no need to yell at us. We are experienced people." A smart man said, "If you do badly and quickly, the speed will be forgotten, but the quality will be remembered. And good deeds, as usual, are not done quickly." "Can you do a good job?" Christopher challenged. "You just do it for me, no matter how." "It's better to take your time with bad things too, father, or what happens? If you do bad things, they'll be accepted late. That's what I'm telling you." "No, I couldn't argue with those bastards." "That's what—" Very glad to meet you," the man said. "My name is Christopher, and I'm your first deputy. Let's talk like this, simply. Evan Christopher, no barriers, no limits. Just keep it simple, keep it right. What do you say?" Something about this man seemed familiar to Evan. The voice, I think, and the sweater. Where had he seen him before? Maybe at a reception. Right, this is the same guy from the video he saw this morning. Not a lot of views, of course, but still. The chief medical director pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. The link was saved. "Hello, Christopher," Evan said. "I'm the new chief physician. I wonder where I've seen you before." And then I answered on the internet. "Look, aren't you in this video?" He turned on his phone and showed it to his deputy. But he wasn't embarrassed for a second. Putting the same trademark smile on his face, he said without hesitation, "You see how well we're doing. We cured him." "Cured who?" The head doctor was surprised. "You know who, the patient. Here, did not go a little bit to the emergency room, so we moved. Do not pay attention, do not worry." "Do you know what happened to him?" Evan asked. "Of course," Christopher replied. "He's fine. We carried him a little bit. He got up and walked away." "What's this man's name?" "So I can verify the information." "Noma's Oliver." The deputy started tapping his fingers thoughtfully. "Nemtsov. Walker. Evan, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" Oliver woke up with a terrible headache. It was like his life energy had been drained out of him and his body was filled with lead. He couldn't move. And most importantly, he couldn't understand where he was or how he had gotten here. The free artist was lying on his side in a semi-dark room. Everything in front of his eyes was red, as if a tasteless curtain had been thrown in front of him. Only his left arm moved faintly, the rest of his body stiff from the forced pose. Yesterday came back in fragments that appeared before his mind's eye, as if in a kaleidoscope. Here he was being kicked out by Vance. Here he asks to be put in the hospital. Then, as in the good old days, he drinks at Morbilus's and bathes in the fountain. And he seems to be going to the public garden. How did he end up here? When he heard voices, Oliver hurried to cover himself with a sheet. He rolled over onto his back, closed his eyes, and held his breath. "You can't do that." The first voice spoke loudly. "You can't do that. Look, if it's about this bum, and God with him, who cares about him?" "Me, I'm interested," answered the first one. "You are ex officio deputy chief physician." "Yes, ex officio," said the second voice. "But in fact, I have a technical degree." "Technical? And I'm telling you, you can't do that." The man shouted in a rage, "You can't sell funeral paraphernalia outside the main building of the hospital." "For God's sake," a second voice contradicted him. "That's a lot of money." "We should have opened a canteen here," objected the first voice. "A pharmacy, anything, but not a ritual store. By the way, where did you get the keys?" Christopher blurted out. First, the new head doctor showed him a creepy video of him and a guard dragging Oliver, and then he gave him a hard time about the funeral parlor, and the workday hadn't even officially started yet. But then Christopher went crazy and opened the door to the store with his own key. "What are we gonna do? We have to find a way out of this. Why shouldn't I have a key?" I asked him in a subservient manner. "I'm the storekeeper. I go around checking things out. What if there's something wrong? What if you get caught short?" Evan countered. "The hospital would have to pay for it. You're the hired help." The previous day came back to Oliver's mind. The keywords: hospital, doctor, ritual hall. How he, sneaking around in the dark, had decided to get into the room. Where he wondered, had he gotten to? "Evan, let's not get facetious," Christopher said. "Yes, the funeral parlor is not a pleasant sight for some of the more impressionable people. But look at the order inside. What cleanliness!" The head doctor had a different opinion. He could smell a subtle but unpleasant odor, which is something people might give off if they're, "Wait, really? See how neat it is here." Christopher kept pushing. Wreaths to one side, ribbons in another, crosses in a third, coffins. "Yeah, let's talk about coffins," Evan agreed. "Does this coffin personally? Doesn't raise any questions." Lying under the sheet, Oliver began to shiver. The voices grew louder and the footsteps closer. He thought about taking off his veil, jumping up and running away, but his stiff body would hardly approve of such a dynamic. "Can you see?" Evan asked. "Oh, for crying out loud, there's a dead body in here. It's in the coffin, not in the refrigerator." Christopher's eyes widened. Indeed, in one of the coffins, under the sheet, the outline of a man was clearly visible. The only nuance was that the arms lay unnaturally on his chest, as if they had been placed carelessly. Overcome with fear, Christopher lowered the sheet. His eyes darkened. In the coffin lay the homeless man they had carried around the corner of the hospital yesterday. "Good God," the deputy whispered, crossing himself. "God forgive me. God forgive me. God forgive me." "Father!" Evan shouted, running up to the coffin. "Father!" Christopher sobbed. He felt sorry for everyone. The poor bum whose heart attack yesterday he'd mistaken for a talent act. The new head doctor, who was starting work with such a tragic incident. But most of all himself, because it is he, Christopher, who will be held responsible for what happened. And it looks like it's going to be more than just a dismissal. Investigators from the capital will come here. They will dig, and they will find every penny that leaked past the state treasury. Ahem. Suddenly the corpse coughed and opened his eyes. "Oh, Evan, it's been years. Did you forget about your file?" In the ensuing silence, a noise was heard as the Deputy Chief Physician for Economic Affairs collapsed to the floor. Evan slapped Christopher's cheeks, trying to bring him to his senses. The Deputy Chief opened his eyes. "It's a good thing there's carpeting everywhere," he whispered. "I'd have gotten hurt." The homeless guy was waddling around, warming up. How could he be Evan's father? Well, life happens, Christopher thought. Sometimes the most disgusting parents have great kids. But more often than not, it's the other way around. "Are you awake?" The doctor in charge asked, "I want a written explanation. Today." With these words, Evan headed for the exit. He had a hard job ahead of him. If he was met with such a mess at the entrance to the hospital, what would happen next? He had not yet touched the medication, the quality of the treatment, and other aspects that made up the success of the treatment. Evan walked with a steady stride, followed by Christopher, who had come to his senses. Oliver, exhausted from last night's drunkenness, was trailing behind him. He was thirsty, and he was leaning against the faucet of the cooler in the ritual stall, behind his son. The deputy chief physician was in such a hurry that he'd forgotten to lock the door. "Evan!" shouted Christopher as they passed through the lobby of the main building. "I can explain everything, I swear." "I don't doubt it for a second," the head doctor replied. Both explain and answer. People began to stare at them. Evan felt awkward, realizing that his new staff was getting to know him here and now in a less than ideal environment. But he was not going to change his mind. "Dear colleagues," he addressed those who were looking at him and Christopher, "I'm sorry we're meeting in such a difficult environment, but we don't have time to dawdle. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get to work." The little speech seemed to make a good impression on the staff. Evan caught a few appreciative glances and smiles and nodded to each one, then froze in indecision, wondering what to do next. "Evan," for a word, a familiar voice sounded behind the newly minted head doctor's back. "Victoria," said Evan, turning around. "You're the last thing I needed." "Evan, I'm not waiting," the girl replied. "You'll give me a few minutes right now, or I'll leave you forever." Christopher rubbed his hands together. This was his salvation. Now, according to the situation, he would either organize a private meeting between them or... No, the chief was definitely not going to kick her out. Zaphos decided to take full control of the situation. Yes, don't kick the girl out," he said. "Come on, I'll show you your new office. You can talk to me. Here, look. This is Frank, our senior security guard. Frank, stay awake." He ran briskly up to the second floor of the main building, taking wide strides. He occasionally looked over his shoulder and made a hand gesture that said, "Catch up, catch up, catch up." Evan sighed and followed, taking Victoria under his elbow. "Victoria, it's nothing personal," the chief said. "It's all gone to shit here." "That's fine," the nurse smiled. "It's about time we got things in order, and I know how." As he passed the guard, Evan beckoned to him. "Frank, a word." Oliver couldn't believe his eyes and ears for a long time. This was how his son had grown, not only in height, but also professionally. He's an entire head doctor. Now, probably, it will be possible to go to the hospital as a free hotel and canteen. Now, no one will dare to kick him out on the street and talk to him disrespectfully. And the guard, he can even pull his ears, and nothing will happen to him for this. True, when the free artist was distracted, just for a second. This nimble little man took his son away under his arm with some girl. "No problem. We just need to find his office. He is the head doctor. Let the registrar try to stop him. She's the worst for it. Good jobs are hard to find in the city these days. I've done a lot for him," Oliver reasoned aloud. "First of all, I brought him into the world. Secondly, I gave him a wonderful dog when he was 3. My wife didn't want him to have one, but who asked her? When my son was 6, I painted a portrait. What else did I do for him? I gave him a name, patronymic, and surname, of course. It wasn't much, but in Oliver's mind, he considered any indulgence to any man to be the highest gratitude on his part. So he was convinced that Evan would not refuse him help. Especially since it was winter and there was nowhere to go. He could go to breakfast in the morning and then to the city, to his favorite pubs and friends, and let them try to keep him out. Freeze. Oliver was brought out of his thoughts by a guard. He literally blocked the road, and the homeless man collided with him with all his might. That's when the power of his opponent was revealed. The guard didn't even stagger, but the artist collapsed to the ground. "Hey, big guy," Oliver snapped at him. "Get out of the way. This is a secure facility," the guard smiled. "You can't come in and out of here as you please." "Yes, you can," replied the artist. "If your son is the head doctor." "Who's that, Evan?" the guard asked incredulously. "That's your idea." "That's a cross," Oliver said with heat. "My dear son, it's been 10 years. Evan was under strict orders not to let you in," the guard explained. "But I wouldn't have let you in anyway. Get out of here, or I'll call Thomas. To tell you the truth, I should have done that yesterday." "No, the guard is definitely lying. There's no way his son, his own flesh and blood, would order his own father off the premises. The officer was definitely cheating. But how do we outsmart this lump? We must get inside by all means and talk to my son face to face." Okay, Oliver smiled. "I'll do it. Can I use the restroom?" "To the bathroom?" the guard asked and scratched his head. There were no orders from the chief physician, and to refuse such a request to a beggar is not Christian. "Come on, I'll walk you out." As they passed the staircase, Oliver, with an unprecedented impetuosity for his age, suddenly darted away and ran upstairs. The guard shouted after him, but he couldn't move at the same speed. "Here's your office, Chief," Christopher said. "Simple but tasteful. In need of repair, of course." The office really didn't make the best impression. A shabby desk, a chair with a broken lift mechanism, a sofa on 3 legs. The walls were peeling and the doorknob was wobbly. Nothing in the world is random though. Christopher had deliberately chosen this particular office so that the new head of the department would ask him to tidy it up. The deputy would demonstrate his own indispensability and efficiency. "Good," Evan said. He was unimpressed by this environment. "Leave us alone." What about? Christopher began to wail. He was waiting for instructions to clean up the office. "All right, go," Evan demanded. "We'll deal with you later." The deputy walked out the door, puzzled. "See how messy it is," Evan said. "What I have to work with here. You won't believe what happened." "Evan, I've been thinking," Victoria said with a touch of solemnity. "Marry me." With these words, she got down on one knee, took a box out of her pocket and opened it. Inside were a pair of charming cufflinks. "Victoria, get up immediately," the head doctor demanded. "What kind of joke is this?" "What kind of jokes?" the girl questioned. "You don't ask me to marry you, so I decided to ask you myself. Well, say yes or no." The door swung open. Oliver stood on the threshold, and a few seconds later the guard ran up. "Son," shouted the artist. "Son, that's how you are with your father, isn't it?" "Evan, I'm sorry." The guard shouted over him. "That old rascal has escaped." Overtaken." The head doctor was silent. Then he looked at Victoria, who continued to kneel, and said, "You wanted to meet my father." Evan pointed at the dirty bum. "Meet Oliver Walker." After, the girl said impatiently. "I was asking you a question." "I agree, Victoria. I'm in. Only on one condition. You'll work here with me." "Okay."
That day, like so many the day before, Jason went about his usual routine of sorting through the new arrivals at the dump. Most of what he found, of course, was useless trash, even for a hobo like him. Here's a picture. It would seem that there was nothing extraordinary about the item. All the more reason for Jason to make no use of it. It was just a professionally taken picture of some office building. Jason was about to throw the photo away, but for some reason he couldn't. He sat down on the ground and stared at the photo. A swanky building, a gorgeous lobby, big bright windows. I think he'd even seen the building, or maybe he'd even entered it. Once those very beautiful doors had opened welcomingly before him, a successful businessman, Jason Leonidovich, dressed in an elegant, expensive suit, who had just stepped out of the fragrant salon of his expensive car. Yes, it was exactly like that, and not so long ago if you think about it on the calendar. In fact, it was as if a whole era had passed. But how did it happen that Jason Leonidovich turned into a bum Jason? That was fate. He stood up, slipped the photograph into his pocket, and walked away from the dump. He didn't want to drink or eat, or look for any valuables he could sell at the nearest stall for a few coins. He wanted to get back to the way things were, though he realized that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do so, but still, maybe not always. After all, he was what he was now. And most importantly, he still had a good education, a head on his shoulders, and business acumen. Yeah, luck ran out. A friend who became a business partner did his best. And after 5 years in prison, he'd have to start from scratch. Jason blew the whistle. "Come on, Ziggy. What are you standing there for?" He called out to his only friend, a small black dog he'd found in the dump. Some kind soul had decided to get rid of the unwanted offspring, but she hadn't drowned the puppies, just threw them away. 2 died, but 1 was still showing signs of life. Help came in the form of Cole, who picked up the poor thing, took it out, and now he was glad that there was at least 1 living creature around, whose companionship was a joy. So, feeling almost like a Robinson in this world, Jason named the dog Ziggy. Whoever needed it would understand, but the rest of us wouldn't care. They walked with their friend to Jason's shack. "So, Ziggy, you want to stay here? I'm going into town. You don't want to be there. It's going to be a long walk. You'll be tired, but I'll bring you something good to eat. Okay?" The dog barked unhappily, but obediently settled down on the beds they shared. Jason set off on what was going to be a long journey. He decided to find the building for himself, not knowing why, just to stand around or something. To pretend he was a normal person for a little while. He even shaved and combed his hair more carefully than usual for such an occasion. I mean, he rarely did that at all, but now he was really getting ready to go out in public. And next to a building like this, it would be a shame to walk around as a ragamuffin. Though, of course, just combing his hair was not going to improve his appearance. After wandering around the city center for a while, he found the place. The time was already approaching evening. The working day was coming to an end. People were coming out of the doors, apparently employees, bosses, middle managers, ordinary clerks. All beautiful, dressed up, satisfied with themselves, and with their often unneeded order. During the day they were waiting for cozy apartments, maybe cafes and restaurants, delicious dinners, communication with the same successful, satisfied with life people. But Cole knew how easily all that prosperity could be ruined. After all, wasn't he the one who stood firm? And this is what he'd become. Of course, it doesn't happen to everyone, but it's not as rare as we'd like it to be. He strolled along the building without purpose. Most of the people were already gone. There were hardly any passers-by. This street was more frequented by cars. As he passed one of the windows, he stopped, attracted by the sounds of some argument or even scandal. The open window was higher than his head. He could not see the people arguing, and they could not see him. So he could listen to what was going on. He stopped just out of curiosity. In general, he didn't like scandals and tried to avoid them. Then, in his past life. But now the business conversation between businessmen, even if it was in a raised tone, intrigued him for some reason. He imagined how he would behave in such a situation. "Where are you taking me?" "Some kind of clean water." "I'll drown you, asshole." "You want clean, you want dirty," the boss's voice rumbled. Another, calmer voice answered. "You're going to get stuck in all this yourself. You can argue with me all you want, but right now the truth is on my side. The labor exchange is on your side now, and you better get the hell out of here." "Before you go to jail," threatened a voice that suddenly sounded familiar. "Of course I'll leave. I'm not staying. Just don't think that's the end of your troubles." "My troubles may not end, but yours will start in earnest. I'm warning you not to play with fire," the boss warned. And judging by his voice, his subordinate believed him. But he didn't want to give up so easily. "But we'll see about that." The interlocutor did not threaten, but just wanted to leave the last word for himself. "I don't see any reason for me to worry. It's you who should be worried in case of anything." They both rattled. "I don't have much to rattle for," the boss replied more calmly. There was a slamming sound, closing the doors. The subordinates must have left the office. Jason grinned. Who talks like that in full voice at an open window? The boss, he couldn't handle his subordinates, couldn't handle confidentiality. Anyone could have been at the window. However, it did not concern him at all, and he also walked along the wall of the building to the exit. The door opened, and a rather young, imposing man hurried out. You could tell by the red stain on his indignant face that he was the one arguing with his boss right now. Cole sighed, followed his nervous jog toward the parking lot and thought, this is just the beginning, isn't it? You'd better be careful around people, especially bosses. He already knew what he was thinking, but he wasn't going to pry into such a man with stupid advice. But this stranger on the way to his car, without stopping, shoved some folder into the trash can, and that was it. He walked to the car, opened the door, got in and drove off. And Cole stayed, very interested. He wasn't used to going through trash, and now he didn't have to do it at all. The folder was on top, and the garbage can itself was clean. He took it out, weighed it on his hand. It looked like nothing special, and certainly nothing useful to him in these papers. But why not take it, flip through it a little, just to hold on to the business papers for old memory? And maybe something interesting could be found out. Shoving the folder under his arm, he went back to his shack, to his lair, having bought 2 hot dogs for himself and for his friend with the last money. In his shack, after a modest dinner, he pulled out his find and began to look through the papers. At first without much interest, just remembering things long forgotten. But with each passing minute, he became more and more convinced that he had picked up the folder for a reason. It was not for nothing that I was near that building and witnessed the argument. Looks like fate has decided to take a turn for the worse. Listen, buddy, he turned to the dog. This is our chance. Maybe we'll be normal people soon, maybe even rich. Well, you're not a man. You'll still be a dog, but still. The dog came and put his face on his master's lap. Don't worry, I won't forget you. You'll always be with me. I'm not the kind of guy who does that to his friends. Jason nodded at the folder and the signature on the last page. He knew those scribbles well enough. I guess he'd been wrong not to look in the window. Then he'd quickly recognized the man who'd caused his present predicament. Maybe he was right. Because before he'd looked at the papers, it had been useless to meet Oliver Jujinovich. But now that he knew a little more about him, it might do him some good. I wonder why that guy threw the file away, decided not to mess with Oliver, knowing his temper. Well, that's pretty smart. Jason, on the other hand, doesn't have much to fear. He's not going to fall any lower than he is. And these documents can play a pretty important role. First of all, it would allow him to get back at Oliver and to do exactly what he deserved. Jason's mind flashed back to 6 years ago. Yes, he'd been a respectable man, a prosperous businessman, husband to the beautiful Crystal, owner of a fancy house, and so much more. But he made an unforgivable mistake, trusted his then partner, whom he considered a close friend. And what a friend he turned out to be. He went behind Jason's back, started running his scams, and you set him up. Jason's responsibility was short-lived. Investigation, trial. Thanks to his lawyer. It was only 5 years, but it was enough to ruin Jason's life. His wife left him as soon as Cole was arrested, so she filed for divorce right after the trial. I never heard from her again. And I never saw her myself. No transfer to juvie, no visit, no nothing. I wrote a couple of times myself, but I quickly realized it was useless. There was no answer. His wife's betrayal was no less painful than Oliver's. And for several years in the penitentiary, he waited for her to come to her senses. Then he got angry, dreamed of revenge, and then he forgot. Once he was free, he didn't even remember Crystal, didn't try to meet her to throw any reproaches in her face. Why? People break up. And in a situation like this, it's best to forget about each other. Like everything else, it seemed useless to fight for his freedom, to try to prove innocence. He preferred to serve his time quietly, without getting involved in any conflicts. And so he did. And now he came to this very freedom, where no one was waiting for him, and no one was glad to see him return. There was no one. Jason's parents were long dead. His friends had mostly disowned him. Some believed in his guilt, and some maybe didn't, but chose not to get involved with the prisoner. There was nowhere to go and no one to go to. But you had to live somehow. And so the former, respected and loved by all, became an outcast, living on the dump or lying about unfulfilled dreams. And that hope, apparently, will soon come true. And all thanks to that photograph. Now it was necessary to think over the plan of his next actions, because it was easy to make a mistake, and there might not be a second chance. He studied the papers again, more thoughtfully, and went to the office. It was not worth it to hope that they would let him in easily. They didn't like ragamuffins, which Jason was. He peered through the window and saw his nemesis. Oliver looked as good as he had 5 years ago, even more solid. "I'll get your ass out of here soon enough," Jason thought to himself, his former friend and now his worst enemy. So how would he get into the office? Try to get in through the window. Yeah, they'd call security, tie him up, send him away without even a word. No, that's not an option. Knock. Calling Alex and asking him to let him in isn't a good idea either. He'll probably order the guards to send him away. So the result would be the same either way. So Jason headed for the door, hoping to somehow get through on his own. A guard stood in his way, as expected. "Where are you going? Get out of here." "No service here," he said menacingly. "And don't ask me. Here, look at this folder, where I've slipped some old papers in for good measure. I must give it to Alex Eugenovich." "Let me give it to him." The guard held out his hand. "No way. I'm told to hand it to him personally. Are you distributing documents here, the contents of which you are not supposed to know?" He tried to give his voice a superior tone. "So you're supposed to know, and I'm not." The guard took offense. "All right, I'll call the owner." "You don't need to call anyone." Jason stopped him. "Let me through. I know where his office is." "What the hell are you thinking? He knows me perfectly well. And you'll find out soon enough. On the other hand, I've been working undercover. Understand?" He liked that line from some detective story. Plus, it explained his shabby appearance. "So let's get you out of here before it's too late." The guard, grumbling grudgingly, let him through, and Jason took a firm step toward the office. There he had to overcome the resistance of the pretty secretary, who turned out to be even more serious. "Alex Eugenovich is busy. He asked not to be disturbed," the girl said, squeamishly glaring at Jason as she stood in his way. But you didn't argue with her. You went straight ahead, realizing that the beautiful girl would now retreat out of fear that the dirty tramp would touch her with laughter. Cole simply opened the door and stepped into the office. "I've asked so many times without this," the big boss began. But then he caught a glimpse of the entrant and faltered. "What, Alex, you didn't expect?" Jason asked, not batting an eye. "I see you're relieved. Good for you. So what's it to you, Cole?" "What's the matter? All this noise?" Alex asked nervously. "My old life I need," Jason calmly replied. "Life? I didn't take it away from you. You're alive and well, I see. But I hardly am. And you don't want to ask that, do you?" "I don't want to ask anything. I asked you what you want, didn't I?" "Answer, I'm in a hurry, or I'll call security to have you thrown out of here." Alex must have been scared at first minute, but quickly realized he had nothing to fear. The sight of Jason proved that he was at the bottom of his game, so it wouldn't be hard to deal with him. But Cole realized something too, both from the paperwork and the first few minutes of the meeting. Alex is vulnerable. He has weaknesses to play to. "Alex, I'm about to show you something. Have a seat." And he laid the folder out on the table. Two businessmen, former partners, leaned over it, and Jason, sliding a not-so-clean finger with a dirty fingernail chip, had no trouble explaining to another businessman what he could do using these documents. And mind you, this is just a copy. I have the original, and far more important. This, of course, was a bluff. He didn't have the original, but he had to do something to scare Alex. He turned visibly pale, clenched his fists, bit his lip. "Well, what do you want, Jason?" he asked again. "What do you want? What do you need? What do you want? What do you think I need?" "I need these documents to be made public and show everyone who you really are." "Is that answer satisfactory to you?" "No, I think we can work something out. I understand you're in a tight spot right now. You need money." "And money? How much?" Cole said with a sneer. I wonder if you want to give me for a bottle of vodka and a pie. But why? I could do with more, mumbled Alex. You'll have to give a lot more. My friend, I don't look very good, and my life is even worse. But I must disappoint you. I didn't become an alcoholic and I didn't drink my brains away. So you can't tempt me with vodka. But I can make these papers go through with no problem. You realize that, don't you? I do. That's what I'm asking. How much money are we talking about? Both very large, Alan, and not just money. I also need an apartment and some help with the paperwork, but I need help with my job. You know what I mean? Failure to fulfill just one point leads to the inevitable publicity of everything I know, including your involvement in my case. You know exactly what that means for you. Look, Cole, this is too much. You come out of nowhere screaming, give me this, give me that, make it 5, 10, and you owe me. I'm not saying that you should really give away everything I've lost by your grace. I know that's impossible. But I can make you realize how much it hurts to lose it. I didn't think you'd go as far as blackmail. I learned that in prison. All right, I'll concede that your demands are legitimate. Besides, we have some very important negotiations ahead of us, and we don't need any more publicity right now. My reputation must be impeccable, Alex muttered to himself. Okay, I agree to your terms, but remember you have to keep silent in any case, no matter how it turns out. I wonder what may or may not happen next. Jason wondered, who found the easy agreement suspicious. But there was nowhere to go. And while we're on the subject, let's make this quick, because I don't have time or place to wait. All the apartment in which I can put you is now available. It's empty. It will be registered to you, Alex said with despair. There will be money as a lifting allowance, but not the largest sum will be enough for the first time. That's why I'll give you a job too. And then you earn your own money. You understand? The salary will be good, but you won't be able to pull anything more than that from me. I understand you. But I hope you understand everything I told you. I'm not that much ahead of you. I did miscalculate some things, though. Well, let's not dwell on the past. Let's get on with the future. He took a stack of papers out of the desk and threw them on the table. Now we're going to get an apartment. No, listen, I'll give you the money. Edward, you need to clean yourself up first. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid to even let you in the car. You stink. What can I do? I've been living in a dump. I mean, I know this is what you wanted, but stars change, especially yours. And things went from there. After he got the money, Jason cleaned himself up as much as possible, bought some clothes, and the next time he walked into his enemy's office, looking almost as elegant as he had before he'd done time. All that was left was the paperwork for the apartment Alex was giving him to own. So that was all clear. What about the job? Jason asked. There will be a job for you, the boss said reassuringly. I know what you're capable of. We'll just get the paperwork done. And that's it. You're a perfectly normal, law-abiding citizen. No one will say a bad word to you about your criminal record. Don't say a word. You're going to be the head of our department. So act like it. Make up some kind of cover story. You can get married for good measure. Are you done with Christina? You don't know. I'm not interested in Christina at all. As for changes on the personal front, we'll see. Jason's new life had begun. He moved into a new, spacious and renovated apartment, where he moved his dog. Jason went to work, but it was impossible to say that he was completely calm about his future. There were plenty of reasons to worry. Every day he was getting more and more into the affairs of the company of his former comrade. The latter realized that the firm, of which he had become a part, was involved in very dark matters, such as bribery and embezzlement. In addition, his own tenure in a prominent position was, strictly speaking, illegal. And all of Jason Leonidovich's associates were literally hanging by a thread, and he was even more vulnerable than anyone else, both as a man tried for economic crimes and as a blackmailer. Alex would not stay silent, but would try to make Jason responsible for everything again. This time, of course, he wasn't going to take the blame. He had the evidence, but he didn't want to go through the hassle. Yes, life had taught him. He wasn't the same gullible Cole anymore. Was he ready to trust in friendship and genuine affection? No, he knew where that could lead and he could quit this job at any time. In the meantime, he'd stayed mostly to get to the bottom of the firm's illegal schemes and, if anything, to be the first to expose Alex without feeling any remorse. On the contrary, after all, he hadn't gotten revenge on him yet. It was not revenge to take what he had gotten from a man by taking from him immeasurably more. But his hatred for his former friend had to be restrained. He worked properly at his new position, but he was not particularly well liked in the team. They were wary of him. But what about the chief's protégé, who appeared from nowhere? What is he here for? Alex Eugeniovich does nothing for nothing, and they tried to communicate with him only on business, and even then, as rarely as possible. The only person who treated Jason kindly was the janitor Veronica. Maybe that young, beautiful girl liked him. Cole sometimes caught her look of sympathy and wondered, how did Veronica know about his difficult fate or just guessed? What was he supposed to sympathize with now? He's got a good job, he's got money. Everything seems fine. And even the attention of such a pretty girl is not deprived. But why does she only work as a cleaning lady? That's the question Jason asked, and that's how their conversation began. Don't think I'm stupid or anything else, she smiled. I have an education and a little work experience, but life circumstances don't allow me to enter the profession yet. I have a small child, and here the work schedule suits me. And there are no grandparents. I have no husband either. But I have a wonderful son. Her face lit up, as every young mother's face does when she talks about her favorite child. After that, they began to talk as friends. First, Jason had no one else to talk to, and second, he enjoyed talking to this really smart woman. But he was hesitant to move on to a closer relationship. He realized that he had an important and dangerous job to do, but he was always happy to talk. He even shared with her difficulties at work and his suspicions. And Veronica was in complete agreement with him. Yes, I see that everything is not clean here, but I deal only with the physical dirt. I'm not supposed to get into the rest of it, but I know more than I'm supposed to. Not just because I'm smart. Nobody takes me seriously around here. They discuss things in front of me, so I draw conclusions. And she was eager to share her discoveries about the dark deeds that Alex Eugeniovich and his trusted people were doing. But from time to time, Veronica began to look at Cole with some concern, and he noticed that she wanted to say something but did not dare. Just say it, Veronica. Is something bothering you? Like you're afraid of something? He asked. I am. Afraid that you won't believe me because I'm making things up or I'm not normal at all, she answered. Nonsense. Did you hear something bad about me? Not really. I didn't tell you, but I have this ability. Sometimes I see, or rather feel, a little more than others. And right now I can see very clearly that you're in great danger. I can't tell you what it is yet, but it's there. Maybe you should see a doctor. Veronica, so sane and suddenly so obscurantist. There's nothing wrong with me, I assure you, Jason grinned. She knew it. She wanted to warn you. It just ruined the whole impression she'd made of herself. Are you going to think I'm a fool or a psychopath now? But it's not like that, I assure you, Veronica said, sincerely upset. No, Nick. I didn't think that for a minute, and I believe you. I'll try to see a doctor soon. You shouldn't joke about it. I do know a lot about you, Veronica said sadly. Cole became wary. What is there to know? But Veronica turned the conversation to another topic, and he quickly forgot about her words, writing it all off to his upset nerves. No wonder, single mom, plenty of difficulties. Surely he wanted to help her, to support her somehow, but he didn't know how. He'd offered her some money, but she'd looked at him like that, so Cole hadn't brought it up again. But he had to remember what she'd said. Whether Jason was joking or not, he didn't have time to go to the doctor. The next day he fainted at work and was taken by ambulance to the hospital. There, after examining him, the doctors said that he was sick with a rare and very complicated disease, and if not treated, he would not live long. How short? A year, 2 years, Jason asked. Anybody would be devastated by such news. And he was a young man whose life was just beginning to get better. But it was even worse than he'd realized. If you don't pay enough attention to your health and treatment, you may have much less. This was crushing news. Cole's first thought was of Veronica. Wouldn't see the woman, wouldn't tell her how dear she had become to him, would she come to visit him in the hospital. Sad experiences of the past had told him that women didn't really like to deal with those who were in trouble. And while Veronica was no Christina, who would blame her if she too stepped aside as if she didn't have enough problems of her own to deal with? But even if she didn't, what could he offer her? Ready to die at any moment. And he was about to confess his feelings to her. What a fate. Just start with relief, as prepare the barn for a new nightmare. And then he thought of Alex. He'd be glad to hear about his former friend's illness. Cole had never gotten his revenge. It hadn't been so hard to do, though, just to report all the shenanigans. Gathered evidence, proof. He wanted to get the word out, so he waited for the right moment. And here it is. I guess all is not lost, though. I mean, nobody's saying he's going to die right now. He's got some time. He may well leave the hospital, return to work, declaring himself quite healthy, and strike a crushing blow. Except Veronica would still have to see him, confess and apologize for the fact that they can't be together. There's not enough time for him. The first to visit him, strangely enough, was Alex Yuginovich. Probably he learned about the serious situation of his friend and decided to cheer him up. And to probe the ground, of course. He was the least interested in Cole's recovery, and would probably be happy with a very different outcome. But he wasn't going to show it. On the contrary, he was trying hard to show how worried he was. Hey Cole, faking sick? I'm just going to skip work, you see. What a boss. Remember, all illness comes from nerves. So cheer up. I thought I'd come and see you, since you're all alone. Maybe I shouldn't have broken up with Kristenko. I think she's alone too. Tried to make something of herself, but it didn't work out. She was lousy, but at least she had some chatter. She's been out of my life for a long time, and I'm not interested in her at all. That's fine. Basically, yeah. Why do you need her? Okay, she did that to you. What about the baby? What baby? Jason wondered. What kid? Don't you know what's going on? Alex wondered. You were taken away, and she was pregnant. Then she gave birth to a boy, I think, and gave him up. It's understandable. You can't do much with a baby in your arms. Why are you so upset? I shouldn't have said that. Don't worry, you can't, I guess. I think it's all right. The boy was adopted. He's probably alive and well. He's doing well in the orphanage, too. I saw on some TV program what kind of orphanage he was in. How pale is he? Jason asked. Where did she give birth? How would I know? I've only seen a glimpse of her. Oh, she's a mean woman, what she says. I got a life to make. Cole's got his life all set up and nobody here will pour me a bowl. Can you believe that? That's what she said. And you're already making a move on our cleaning lady. If you can take Cole out of the dump, you can take the dump out of the person. But she's all right. You're a pretty girl, you're agile. So quit being sick, get well, get your life together and get back to work. Everyone's waiting for you. Alex, pleased with himself and the effect of his news, left. And Jason, not hearing his last words, was left in the worst state of mind. He has a son, and he is, it turns out, 6 years old. And he either lives in an orphanage or with strangers he thinks are his parents, and doesn't know about his father. This news was not easy to recover from. Yes, from the hospital must be urgently discharged to find his child. But what's the point? Even if she does, how much time will they have left together? And the baby will get another trauma, from which we'll be able to recover. But he couldn't give up trying to find his son, even just to find out about his fate. But who could he ask for help in such an endeavor? The door opened, and Veronica came in. Jason, as soon as I found out, I came straight to you, she said excitedly. So his dream seemed to have come true. He could explain himself to Veronica, but just now he found out. This information completely filled his brain. It was not up to love, and he did not even feel much joy from this visit. It was a little easier, though. At least he had someone to share it with. Hi, thanks for coming. It's really good to see you. You know, Veronica, I have a son, he said, and was ready to tell about his ex-wife's meanness. But Veronica interrupted him with some unexpected words. I know, Cole, I told you about my gift, so as soon as I saw you, I realized you are the father of my Kiryusha. I didn't know how to tell you. How do you say you thought I'm a charlatan? Yes, I adopted him when he was still a baby. but no one knows that my son is adopted. I didn't want to tell you because I'm ashamed to tell you that I'm infertile after a childhood illness. You don't believe me? I'll show you all the documents. I'm not a con artist. It says I adopted him, and Christina gave birth to him. And then you can take a DNA test. Jason leaned back on the pillow helplessly. God, was it really true? Veronica, I believe you. Of course I believe you. Without any paperwork, without any tests. And I'll probably find out just before I die. Is there no danger? Yes, but there's a very good chance of survival. I can see that you've recovered. Thank you again. I can see my son as soon as he's well. I don't want to take him to the hospital. He's been afraid of them since he was admitted for bronchitis when he was 3. Wouldn't you want to take him away from me? Veronica asked anxiously. Take him away. You know, I wanted to tell you something today. I love you, Jason took her hand, and I want you to be with me and with our son. Yes, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Do you understand? Cole, Veronica whispered tearfully. Jason gave her the keys to his apartment and asked her and her son to live there until he returned, and to please watch Frankie. He's my dog. He's probably suffering alone in there right now. Don't be afraid of him. He's kind. The food is in the lockers. It's better to walk him twice a day. He's very docile. Cole smiled, realizing how much he missed his companion. It would probably make him feel better to have his faithful friend's face resting on his shoulder again. The doctors insisted that Jason stay in the hospital because his condition was alarming, but he was adamant. No, I have something very important to finish, more than one thing. Anyway, I'll finish it. I'll be back, I promise. I feel fine. I'll take the medicine as you write. You're in danger of never coming back. Well, or you'll be brought back with your legs, pardon my bluntness, the attending physician said dryly. But how would a man who had been lonely for so many long years like to live happily with his beloved woman and son? He had no idea what happiness it was to hold his child in his arms, and he already saw how together they would go for walks, sit at the table or on the couch, watching cartoons. Yes, for this he was ready to be cured. Only now, having realized how much he didn't want to die. He'd lost a lot of time away from his son. Not seeing him as a baby, not seeing his first steps and first smile. But if it hadn't been for that time in prison, Kyle wouldn't be Veronica's son, but Christina's. And it might have been a long time before he would have known what the woman he thought was his beloved and loving wife was really like. And it would be foolish to think that she would never have revealed herself, would still have delivered a terrible stab in the back, choosing the moment. Illness would not have forgiven. Likewise would have walked away, abandoning the child. And most importantly, he would never have known Veronica. I wanted to live now more than ever. And of course to take revenge on his enemy. Because now he had more information, more opportunities, and more reasons to take revenge. There was no forgiving that. So Jason insisted on being discharged, left the hospital, and rushed home, where his dearest people were waiting for him. And he wasn't the only one happy to be back, meeting his son, a truly wonderful, well-developed boy. Veronica's joy, the delight of the meeting all this made him forget about the disease, and not think about the possibility of imminent death. And even the fact that the next day he was waiting for a date with people among whom there were not those he wanted to see, did not spoil his mood. When he left the hospital, his colleagues noticed that Jason Leonidovich looked much better, and his mood became more positive. They thought it was because he had been cured, but it wasn't really that. He was just happy. But his physical condition was far from the best, which he carefully hid from everyone, including Veronica. They, working together, continued to collect the dirt necessary to testify and send Alex Eugenovich to the place where he so easily sent other people, time after time avoiding deserved punishment. But now he would have no chance to avoid punishment. He had sinned too much. But the disease wasn't going to wait. Jason's condition was worsening, and when all the evidence, including the videos incriminating Alex Eugenovich, was in hand, Cole was again taken away by ambulance, now out of the house. The doctors were outraged. Now there was no way around the complicated surgery. and there was no guarantee it would work. And it didn't. The patient fell into a coma. But Veronica was not going to retreat and let the whole case, because of which her beloved was in such a serious condition. She decided to sue her boss herself. She even suspected that the boss was somehow guilty of her loved one's illness. They're capable of anything. Should he have slipped some kind of poison? Not only that, he's got a bad reputation. He could have done some kind of spoiling too. But don't get your hopes up. Cole's going to come to his senses. And he'd be glad to know that the case was moving forward. She was sure of it. Alex Yujanovich hadn't expected this outcome at all. He hadn't blamed Jason's illness, but he was glad that the man who'd been plotting against him was out of commission. Hopefully for good. How ungrateful they can be. I got him off the street, dressed him, gave him shoes and a job, and all he could think about was how to beat me up, he thought, forgetting who had put Jason on the street. And it turned out that even the illness of his former friend did not save him from punishment for everything he had done. And thanks to whom? The cleaning lady, whom Alex Yuganovich didn't even consider to be a human being, a completely insignificant creature who had gotten involved with this half-dead ex-convict and sued him, a prominent businessman, against him, who had never said a bad word to her. It's clear that Cole used her, but what's she gonna do now? She's out of her mind, stupid. If that bastard doesn't die, he'll be crippled. He'll sit on her neck, lose her job, and then she'll be left with nothing. She'll go begging with a child and a husband growing on her hands. And no one will give her a handout. He'd said all this to Veronica at the confrontation, but she'd reacted rather calmly. Jason's on the mend already. He'll be a witness against you at the trial, she said. I'm going to come out, do you hear me? He shouted, seeing his angry words failing to accomplish their purpose. The investigator made some notation in his notebook and called him to order. With your threats, you are only making your own situation worse, he said. Alex was ready to cry from helplessness. As for Veronica's words about Cole recovering, they weren't quite true. He had regained consciousness, but his condition was still a serious concern. He was not to be disturbed. Veronica visited him every day, but she couldn't stay with him for long. She was busy with the baby and testifying against Alex. And every time she visited, she noticed a young female doctor, Angela Adamson, next to her lover's bed. At first, it was reassuring. Cole would never be neglected and his condition would be constantly monitored. But then it got suspicious. Why on earth would this young woman be anywhere near Cole? But not to make a jealous scene in the hospital. Besides, it wasn't just jealousy that was bothering her. But maybe it was worth paying closer attention to their interactions. As Jason came to his senses, Angela, who was helping him, asked, "Aren't you Jason Leonidovich, the businessman who disappeared without a trace a few years ago?" "Yes, but not without a trace. I went to jail, spent 5 years in prison. Not that Cole was all that in the mood for conversation. But still, talking to someone was easier than just lying there staring at the ceiling." "Yes, your life is strange, businessman," the woman said in an unusual tone. "And no sooner did you get out than you got sick." "Yes, as you see. But I think I feel better now, thanks to your efforts." "Yes, men like you neither burn in fire nor drown in water, don't you think? However, medically it's not all smooth sailing. But that's fixable. Did you have a wife? Christina, if I'm not mistaken." There was a hint of irony in Angela's voice. "I did. As soon as I went to trial, it came up," Jason answered, still not sure where the doctor was going with this. "So you wanted her to wait 5 years and stare out the window, not make her steal and rob other people. I know Christina. She doesn't abandon loved ones in times of need. You left her pregnant. And all you're worried about, I take it, is your promising career falling apart. And she, poor thing, was so upset that she lost the baby. She's been depressed ever since. But I know you don't care. You've got another woman running to you. Does she even know what kind of person you are?" "She knows everything. But Angela Adamson, I'm guessing you don't know what's going on with your friend. So you only believe what she tells you?" "Don't tell me she dumped me. That's bullshit. I'm over it, and I'm over it. But the fact that she left our son at the hospital and walked out of their light, how do you think that feels?" Jason couldn't contain his feelings any longer. "Left how?" "She said the boy was stillborn," Angela said, confused. "She's dead herself, but her soul died a long time ago. My son is alive, But now he has another mom, the same one who visits me. But please don't tell my ex-wife or your friend. My son and I have nothing to do with her anymore." You can't believe Christina would do that. I don't believe it. She was so worried. I don't know what she was worried about or what it was about, but everything I'm telling you is true. I didn't know she was pregnant, and I didn't know she was keeping the baby. She never even wrote me a letter. So go protect her, be her friend. But don't turn your back on her and don't publicize it. Or they'll think you're the same. Angela left without saying anything. It was obvious that she was shocked by the news about her friend, but she wasn't going to take anyone's word for it. She soon learned through her own channels that Jason hadn't lied about the baby and that Christine had simply given up on the newborn. She learned that the baby had been adopted by a childless woman. Shocked, she called her friend and told her she knew everything and didn't want to talk to her anymore. She didn't tell Jason about her son. He didn't ask. And the fact that her friend, if not dear, then sometimes useful, now didn't want to talk to her didn't upset her too much. Probably in my life began a white streak. I do not need friends, she said mockingly. Not everyone is as pure as you, Ellie. I have enough friends and girlfriends without you. And you, Madam Doctor, you can go ahead and give enemas to your patients. Fortunately, I'm healthy. Yes, physically, Angela replied, hanging up the phone and blocking her ex-girlfriend. The next day, the doctor apologized to Jason for her outburst and said she wouldn't blame him for anything from now on. Christina, no doubt, is herself to blame for leaving her husband in distress, but that's understandable. But the abandonment of his own child, a terrible sin that does not deserve forgiveness. No woman would understand such a wild act. All the more Christine is not poor and could well raise a child alone. But come on, my Kyle with a new real mom is even better than it was before. As long as she doesn't have any more babies, I don't think she will. She seems to have other plans. Let's get her better. That was the beginning of the communication, which for some reason alarmed Veronica. Meanwhile, the investigation was looking into Alex's case. The investigator also came to Jason at the hospital, informing him that after the trial he would be able to claim solid compensation as a party who had suffered from the defendant's actions. Veronica knew about it too, so it wasn't just female jealousy that bothered her about Jason's interactions with the doctor. She feared for Cole, knowing that Angela knew his ex-wife. She feared that the two devious women were still communicating and together, perhaps plotting something nefarious. It's not for money or profit these two girlfriends are getting close. Why, the moment is most favorable for them. He's sick. He's practically at Angela's mercy. And who knows what she might come up with. Give him some kind of will-depriving drug, and he'll sign anything without realizing it. No, we don't need that money. I'm afraid Cole can't take another shock. We have to get him out of this hospital by any means necessary. Just then, she heard about a young doctor who used unconventional methods in his practice and was very good at treating ailments like the ones Jason was suffering from. He was very active. She had secured an appointment with this doctor and his agreement to take a new patient for treatment. She'd been in such a hurry, in such an effort, that she hadn't listened to her intuition, which she'd always trusted. And although the doctors at the old clinic were strongly opposed to the transfer of such a heavy patient, she achieved her goal. Both she and Jason, who seemed to be on the mend, but too slowly. And here he was examined by a young doctor, Ben Jonovich, who gathered a whole concilium of doctors who generally approved the previous treatment. They just prescribed a few other drugs. The attending physician was Ben Jonovich, who reassured Veronica that the patient would soon be completely healthy. Only, I won't be able to take care of him too often and for too long. I have a small child at home, she worried. Maybe one of your workers could be hired, but for a fee. Of course, we have a very good nurse. She's an experienced nurse, too. Many patients credit their recovery 50% to her, I believe. I'll introduce you now. He looked out into the hallway, asking someone, "Where's Emily? Could you get her, please?" Soon a quick, smiling, middle-aged woman entered the office. "Don't worry, I'll have your patient like Christos behind my back. I take care of the sick like infants. He can't pee in time. I won't rest until I see you walking out of the hospital on my arm." And good riddance, Emily said. Pretty nurse's face. And so it was. With kindness, she spoke convincingly, sincerely. and Veronica did not even doubt that she was leaving her beloved in safe hands. She was ready to pay for decent care. "Oh, it's a bit much. I'll take for less money." "Yours isn't that heavy," Emily said when she heard the price Veronica was willing to pay. Jason really wasn't in the worst condition, and Veronica was almost relieved, certain that they would be walking out of the hospital on his arms soon. But not only was his condition not improving, it appeared to be getting worse. To her questions, Ben Jonovich answered confidently. "What do you want?" At first, it's always like this. It means that the body is fighting, including all the resources. That's why it's harder. It won't last long. Hopefully soon it will be easier. And Veronica was not only perceptive, but also attentive and observant. Maybe that was her main gift. Thanks to these qualities, she began to notice some oddities, and the truth was revealed to her more and more clearly. Veronica noticed that Ben Jonovich had a rather strange relationship with Emily, and not only in the office. They'd often smothered a coworker, especially at a time when she'd already left Jason. A few words she'd heard made it clear that the obliging caregiver wasn't as easy as she wanted to make it seem. Veronica decided to eavesdrop on the conversations between the genial doctor and the affectionate nurse. "Soon, my dear," soon said Ben Jonovich, apparently answering some question from Emily. "I'm in a hurry myself. What can't you see? I mean, I'm in a rush, but we're not going to get anything without results." "You're right, we should be in a hurry." "I'm afraid of unnecessary suspicion, which will cause his imminent death," answered Emily. "I don't care about suspicion. They won't prove anything. I wish it were sooner." "As if I didn't have an edge," replied the woman unhappily. "Not to mention that I'm fed up with this fool. It's not easy to take care of him too. And I have to approach others. How many pots do I have to carry? But bear with me a little longer. Once you've taken it on, they'll increase the amount, so don't talk so much. It's hanging by a thread. One word too much and I'm in jail, not money to talk. I'll never let a word out of my mouth. You think I don't realize this is serious? It's not the first time, okay? Here you go, and gently too. Please. Instead of those pills with the red stripes on them, put these instead. You got it. And replace the IV drip so that he doesn't suspect anything, not his girlfriend or the nurse. Save yourself. Such a snake. A chill went down Veronica's spine. They're killing Jason, and they're in a hurry to do it. But why? What do they have against him? What kind of money, and from whom do they hope to get it? Could it really be Alex Eugenovich, determined to eliminate Cole for good out of revenge? She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and the unfamiliar metallic voice rang, clearly in her ears. Ben, I'm not interested in your problems. A card debt is a debt of honor. You must pay it back now. Is it soon? Ben Jonovich begged. I'm doing the best I can. Then do more than you can. No one will wait, but soon Christina will inherit the inheritance and I'll give it all back. None of this business of yours concerns me. How you get it and what you get doesn't matter. Just make sure you pay your debt as soon as possible. How long can we wait? Yes, Ma, I am, don't worry. And that was the end of the horrible visions. But it was clear to Veronica. So that's it, she thought painfully. He's a gambler. So he has to eliminate Jason somehow, so that his ex-wife can get the inheritance and pay off Ben Jonovich for his terrible deeds. And I'm the one who sent their clinic into that wolf's den. Well then, I'll have to save him myself. But how do I do that? She can't sit next to the man she loves. She's got a son and a dog waiting at home, and she doesn't know much about medicine. Transfer Cole back to his old hospital. But won't her constant demands be seen as some kind of bizarre whim? I mean, her vision isn't proof, and she has no other evidence. And judging by the doctor's coordination, the nurse won't blab. They're careful and experienced. No, I can't do this on my own. Realizing this, Veronica decided to turn to a private detective. He should know how to deal with this situation and find a good specialist. She explained to him without any secrecy what was going on and what made her suspicious. I understand. You can just laugh at my visions. What I overheard doesn't mean much either. Yeah, well, maybe I really am crazy, But the fact remains that Jason was on the verge of recovery. Now he's dying. The other doctors can't keep a constant eye on him. There are a lot of patients in the hospital, Veronica said, breaking her arms. But the private detective took her story quite seriously. It doesn't matter whether I believe your gift or not. The important thing is that there is a problem, and it must be solved. I'm on it. Together, he and Veronica gathered evidence and easily proved the complex scheme Christina had devised. Cole's death was to the advantage of the whole company. His wife, albeit ex-wife, would become the sole owner and receive the money. But how to eliminate her ex-husband? She didn't want to meet him. And even if she did, how would she kill him? Christina couldn't do that. She didn't see herself as strong or capable. She turned to Arthur, her brother, a man well acquainted with the criminal environment and had some connections. With his help, she came across this Dr. Benjanovich, who was in dire need of money. He, as it turned out, was an avid gambler and mired in debt. After listening to the conspirators, he agreed without further ado, but asked for a fee for his work. You understand, I can't do it alone. I will have to hire a man who, you understand, will not work for nothing and keep his mouth shut. Think about what kind of work you're signing me up for, so that everything will be without deceit. Give me a receipt that you borrowed this money from me. Of course, it was not without arguments, but there was nowhere to go. The receipt was written. The contract was made verbally. Emily's experienced caregivers could use the money too, so she agreed, colluding with Benjanovic, also for a considerable sum. And the medical staff began to act together, switched the drugs prescribed to Jason, and from day to day waited for his death. However, the young body stubbornly resisted thanks to honest doctors and nurses. Benjanovich and Emily's actions were exposed. They were detained, and none of them began to hide the customers. The whole company was put on trial, receiving prison sentences for attempted murder instead of money. Jason, having gotten rid of Benjanovich's treatment, recovered quickly. Now Veronica was afraid to leave him even for a minute, trying to be near him at all times, entrusting Kyle to a nanny. It was becoming increasingly clear to Jason that this woman was his salvation and happiness. Plus, she had become a mother to his son. He already knew Kyle, but they hadn't had a chance to talk for a long time. Cole was aware that he still had to learn how to be a real father. However, the boy was happy that now he had not only a mom, but a dad as well. So it shouldn't have been much of a problem. And after what he had been through over the past few years, the task didn't seem too difficult. Soon Jason made a full recovery and was released from the hospital. Not only recovered physically, and his family's financial situation was much better. Even the fact that they were both out of work wasn't something to worry about. It wasn't because they decided not to work, living off the compensation they'd received for the damage Alex had caused. Jason had decided to start his own firm. We can afford it now. I won't be a salaried employee anymore, I'll be the owner, but I won't take you on as a cleaner either. Don't get your hopes up. You know, it's not like I was born a janitor. I'm actually a designer by training. Maybe you could use me in that capacity. Veronica rejoiced at his success. You will. But you know, Veronica, the very first thing I would like to do is to arrange our wedding. And I'll finally adopt my own son. And we'll be a real family. And I think we've been one for a while now, she replied, kissing her lover. And Buddy, as if to confirm these words, was twirling his tail as if it were a propeller.